tribal perspective and in their expertise throughout the day. So with that, I want to thank the creator. I want to make sure that we have good conversations, and this is a great hearing today. So welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. It is an honor to be here with you today. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm John Reynolds, Commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission and the assigned Commissioner to the Carrier of Last Resort rulemaking proceeding, for which we're all gathered here today. It is a pleasure to be with you here at the Twin Pine Hotel and Casino in Middletown, Rancheria, and I want to thank Middletown Rancheria for providing a home for this event and for hosting us. I also want to welcome and thank the panelists who are joining us for the discussions today, as well as thanking the PUCs and Middletown Rancheria's IT and administrative teams who are helping to ensure that we're broadcasting clearly. Hauk, who is co-moderating this event with me today. Last but not least, this event would not be possible without the Communications Division staff who organized this workshop today, and I want to thank and congratulate them for their hard work in bringing today's event to life. To start, I want to share a little bit of background on the PUC and the COLA rules. The California Public Utilities Commission is a public government agency that regulates public utilities in California, spanning across the energy, water, and telecommunications industries, serving a 6-year staggered term. As a commissioner, I'm assigned to a wide variety of cases, including this Carrier of Last Resort rulemaking proceeding. And I'll sometimes use the acronym COLR for Carrier of Last Resort. As for COLR rules, these originated starting in the 1990s. In 1994, the legislature tasked the commission with initiating a proceeding to ensure universal telecommunications service, including essential telecommunications services, were provided at affordable prices to all Californians. In response, the Commission decided to designate what we call carriers of last resort, existing incumbent telephone providers in each service territory that would be required to serve all customers in those areas consistent with that universal service policy. This created what is known as our COLR rules and requirements for these telephone providers. Among a number of things, these rules require that at least one telephone company in a specified area is legally required to provide access to basic telephone service to anyone in its service territory who requests it. This means that a COLR cannot withdraw from its COLR obligations unless another carrier takes on the requirements. And there are 9 different elements of basic service, which I won't cover in depth here, but include, for example, the ability to call 911 and receive voice-grade service quality. This rulemaking is evaluating possible changes and updates to COLR rules so that they are as effective and relevant today as possible given the technology and regulatory changes in the past 30 years in the provision of telecommunication service, while also ensuring that no one is disadvantaged due to a change in the COLR rules and that all Californians have access to affordable, safe, and reliable telephone service. I acknowledge that most Californians today do not rely on basic voice services, typically provided on plain old telephone service or landline telephone service, and are instead moving to more data-intensive internet-based services on cell phones or broadband. These require support from modern, higher bandwidth communications infrastructure and networks. This evolution of our networks has resulted from a combination of private investment and state and federal government commitments like Broadband for All and federal funding account last mile grants to invest in advanced networks to serve all customers in the state, even in remote areas. That said, we also currently have a 100-plus-year-old legacy telephone network infrastructure that is already everywhere in the state and that has been used and continues to be used to provide universal phone service. While we've added potential investment in newer networks, the physical infrastructure of our legacy telephone network, poles, conduit, and rights-of-way have contributed to delivering and still continue to deliver universal communications service to Californians. Sometimes this service on a legacy network is the most reliable form of communication service for residents in certain areas where cell phone service and broadband internet is not readily available or accessible. I'll note here that our COLR rules are designed to be technology neutral, and it has not been our expectation that COLRs serve customers through copper networks, though we have seen carriers choose that technology to deliver service. In this rulemaking, our fundamental goal is that all Californians have access to reliable and high-quality communication services for safety, critical communication, and broader connectivity needs, no matter their income or where they live, including in high fire threat, disaster-prone, rural, remote, and underserved areas. These are just some of the various issues we're examining in this COLR proceeding, and we will be hearing different perspectives today from tribal members, public safety officials, county supervisors, and other state commissions and staff on how COLR obligations look in today's environment, who relies on the communications grid, and their experience with the COLR requirements and other related topics. Look forward to our panel discussions, and I will now turn over to Commissioner Houck for opening remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds, and thank you, Chairman, for hosting us and being here today to participate in this discussion. Good morning, everyone. I want to also thank the Twin Pine Hotel and Casino as well as the Rancheria for providing this space. And a thank you to Middletown Rancheria staff as well as our PUC staff for helping to organize the workshop, and our IT folks for being here today and making it possible for virtual participation by both panelists and the public. I also want to give a special thank you to our panelists for taking the time to join us today and to share their perspectives on the various topics that will be addressed today. Telecommunication services are essential in today's society. The California Public Utilities Commission is tasked with the duty to ensure that Californians have access to safe and reliable essential telecommunication services. And as my Bagley-Keene partner, Commissioner Reynolds, shared the background for instituting this rulemaking, R2406-0112. It's to consider changes to the Commission's Carrier of Resort or COLR rules. As was noted, the Commission adopted rules on Carrier of Last Resort obligations. In the last time we looked at this was in decision 96-10-006 back in 1996. So it's been almost 30 years since we've reviewed these rules. These rules are important as they ensure all Californians have access to essential telephone services. However, as technology continues to advance and as circumstances change, we need to revisit these rules to ensure that they are up to date and are serving their intended purpose for Californians today. It's very important that we hear various perspectives from those who are impacted by these rules and those providing services to help us decide on whether and to what extent the Commission's Carrier of Last Resort rules should be revised. The purpose of today's workshop, as Commissioner Reynolds indicated, is to hear the perspectives of tribal representatives, public safety officials, and first responders, rural county officials, and other state commissioners on essential communication services and their experience with Carrier of Last Resort services. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today and the perspectives that we'll hear from all of the panelists. The information obtained is going to be very important in aiding the Commission in evaluating the existing Carrier of Last Resort rules. Again, I thank everyone for being here today. I think we're going to have a great discussion, and I will now turn it back over to Commissioner Reynolds.
And we will now be turning to our first panel, which will be moderated by Commissioner Houck. So this will be the Tribal Perspectives panel, and I will turn it back to you to introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. I just want to check and see, do we have Eric Cartwright on? Is Eric Cartwright online? And I don't. Is it possible? Is it just audio, or are we able to put him on the video? We've got Eric there. So our panel today is Moke Simon, the tribal chairman for Middletown Rancheria of Pomo Indians of California. And we've got Eric Cartwright, the chief information officer for the Karuk tribe, participating remotely. We had scheduled James Russ, the tribal administrator for Round Valley Indian Tribe, but there was a last minute change in plans where he is not going to be able to be here today. And so maybe just give it one more minute for IT to get Eric back up remotely. Or while we're waiting for Eric, I don't know, Chairman, if you wanted to give a brief overview of the level of service and access to service that you have here in Middletown. Oh, okay. Go ahead, and then we'll.
Excellent. Yeah, well, appreciate the time today. Obviously, rural communities, and I think, obviously Lake County being one of the most rural lake in Northern California that, we deal with these service connections. But for here, it's for Middletown Rancheria, our service is AT&T. That's how we get our service. We always have. And, it's there. That's what I will say at this point. Communication is very important as far as the level of service. We don't have any And there were some thoughts. Let me ask Eric if you can hear us.
Hi, Eric. Can you hear us?
You're a little bit echoey. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Were you able to hear the question or should I repeat it?
I'm sorry, it's so echoey I cannot understand you.
Is this better?
Much better, thank you.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Oh. If we can't hear you. I think you may be, are you on mute?
It does not appear to be muted on my side. Can you hear me now? Testing, testing.
Mr. Cartwright, can you please test your microphone?
I am testing my microphone right now. The fellow people on the WebEx say they can hear me. Can you hear me in the room?
I can hear you, yes.
So it's working now?
Hear you, Eric.
Did the commissioner say something? I couldn't quite hear it.
Yes, go ahead and speak, Mr. Cartwright.
So you can hear me now? Everything's working? Well, I'll start my introduction. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. The Karuk tribe is located in far northern California in Siskiyou and Humboldt counties. And we deal with 2 carriers of last resort and at least 2 other CLECs, depending on the community. In one of our communities, we have no carrier of last resort. And in that community, all of the non-tribal housing was served with broadband internet right away, but it took us an extra 10 years to work with the local CLECs to bring broadband into the tribal housing. And it was terrible because on every map it said that this community was served, but it was served for everyone but the tribal members. And I think if we had a carrier of last resort, maybe that situation could have been avoided because everyone would have had to have been served. Although I know carrier of last resort rules don't quite apply to broadband yet. In another community, we have a carrier of last resort that is a small LEC. We have a great relationship with them, and they've managed to deploy fiber to the home. And we have no issues with broadband or communications in that community. In a third community, we have a carrier of last resort that is a large telecommunications company, and we've had a very rocky relationship. We've had to file multiple complaints to get them to do their job. So I think along with the carrier of last resort rules, that their rules are very important and they need to be updated. And I think they need to also have enough strength behind them to make sure that the carriers are required to meet those obligations. The Karuk tribe is in a very rural area, and cell service is sometimes available and sometimes not, but is definitely not available between communities. And so if there is an accident on the road or something like that, finding a nearby home with a landline can be the only way to receive 911 service, for instance. Otherwise, you're waiting on a passing car that is willing to drive to cell service to call 911 on your behalf. So I think the more rural areas we have, especially where broadband or cell service is not fully shared with everyone, the carrier of last resort rules can be the difference between life and death. This is very important. And unless we are willing to make sure that broadband and cell phone service is available for everyone, landline carrier of last resort is still very important.
Brings us to our next question. As far as, the number of, and you partially answered this, the number of residents that are currently relying on the Kohler landline services and the basic telephone service, and whether this is or is not do you recommend any changes to the elements of basic service, such as adding our service, or how does mobile phone service fit into the concept of Kohler? Start with the chairman, and then we'll go to Eric.
Yeah, I think it's essential. I definitely think that the idea of broadband service, but, I think I apologize to Mr. Kirkbride, Chief Information Officer, quite a few. As we move forward with the very last report, so rulemaking is always considered, because, like I said, we have a business that is got service. I definitely think that adding the other two services would be good. We do have mobile service, but broadband internet is very important. Something we're working on from the tribe. Conversation as we grow a bit. And the other thing that was touched on, counties, the response times are county response. And having to go somewhere else. I've run into that different conversation. Even if there are landlines and stuff, we also have to work with the fire departments. Our roads are usually not named on the county mapping system. Same way, we have cell phone provider, phone provider, the gas. Deciding all these things and making sure that 911 are very important. So I definitely think some of those changes as the rules also really make sure that, so these are required. So just use the shoe if you go to Rancheria, making sure that you have. That's as soon as like that we're doing. And like I said, some of the other generations will have that it's actually through like this.
Chairman, can you talk a little bit about the need for the continued Kohler service and whether broadband and mobile service, given technology changes, should be included as part of a Kohler service?
Yes, I think that
Hold on
I th-
1 second. I don't.
Okay.
um, So that should be provided under Kohler, should the landline services continue as Kohler, and given technology changes, how does broadband and mobile service fit in? And so that should those technologies be included, given what we're seeing in change in technology and some of the comments regarding younger generations relying more on internet and mobile services?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. I would guess that about less than half of our communities rely on traditional landline phone services, but that half is very important. Sometimes it's the businesses, sometimes it's the elders, and sometimes it's just people that don't want to trust broadband, which is not always reliable either. So there's a standard of quality for the delivery of phone service that not all broadband providers meet. I do think all Californians should have access to, at their choice, landline service, cell service, and broadband. I think they're all potentially essential, and that you may not need all of them, but with all three, each household can then choose which services they need. So if it were up to me, I would want to see all three added to Kohler service to some degree, especially in rural areas, though, where not all three are available. Making sure that whichever ones are available are mandated for all people will address many issues, especially public safety issues and the ability to reach emergency services when needed.
Thank you. So you've both mentioned 911 and emergency response services and the importance of having access to being able to reach emergency responders. Should Kohler obligations be tied to communications resiliency requirements, such as backup power at network facilities or at the customer's location, especially if we're potentially looking at internet or mobile phone service?
Simple answer is yes. Resiliency is the most important thing. If we've learned anything over the last decade, that always needs to be a conversation as we're doing this. And not only thinking from the standpoint of the folks that can afford these things, it's for the folks that can't afford these things. That's the important conversation. So from my standpoint, for the Middletown Rancheria and its residents, I think one of the most important things, not only for 911 services also, but we've, since the Valley Fire in 2015 on September 12th, in some of those instances, it's important that we have those services, since then we put in a fire siren that can be heard throughout the whole valley here that works on that service. It's very important. It's a warning siren that goes off, tested once a month. We want to make sure all those communications attached to any of these lines have that resiliency as we move forward. That's not only for our tribe, that's this entire valley on the south end. If there's a huge fire or earthquake or other thing, that we need to make sure that we're having those opportunities. So as far as resiliency and backup, It's something that is always a conversation, whether it's battery generator, solar power generator, however you're going to do it. I think it's important. Here on the Rancheria, we've done extensive work. We've got a lot more work to do, but having backup power when there is none, and connected to the system so our families can continue to thrive or be safe during any instance is really important. So simple answer is yes, but that was a long follow-up, I guess. But I think it's very important. I think any one of the carriers should be having those same considerations of how important it is.
Thank you. And then Eric, do you want to talk about resilience and whether COLR obligations should be tied to communications resilience, particularly when we're looking at multiple technologies?
I agree with the tribal chairman. The simple answer is yes. For years, whenever the power company, PG&E, would lose power, we would also lose phones. And once the power safety public shutoff, PSPS, started, that would happen even more often. No longer was it just in severe weather, it was the threat of severe weather, whether it arrived or not, shut off all power and phone to the community. And so having these backup power and as much as possible having redundant communication links is proving vital to maintain the communications.
Thank you. So another question, does the existing COLR obligation to serve all customers succeed in protecting public safety and ensuring universal service in your communities? If so, can you provide some examples? And if not, can you talk about why it's not succeeding and what changes may be necessary to make sure that the communities you're in are served? And Chairman, we'll go to you and then to Eric.
Yeah, I think Eric will have, because as he talked about the 3 different communities here, with the Rancheria here that we're on, obviously proud to say we just grow from 80 acres to 333 acres. Couldn't be any prouder of that. But here in the local system, you know, we haven't had any specific instances where we haven't been able to complete something, whether that's, it's not due to just the COLR conversation, it's due to the resiliency of the tribe and our communication with our local county and representatives, sheriff's department, fire department, and other things, and that communication that we built things out. So I don't have any specific changes for service changes besides, as I talked earlier, being available. If we have an issue, we will definitely bring it up and try and work through it. But I don't have any specific suggestions on changes. Maybe Eric, with his 3 different communities, have a different aspect on that. But at this point, the communication is there, but we need that service and it needs to stay. That's our attitude. That's why I'm here today, to talk about that. And not only for the Rancheria, but our entire community. You know, our folks at the senior center in Middletown and around the lake, always make sure we're communicating with them and making sure they have these basic services that are available are really important. So.
Thank you, Chairman. Eric?
Yes, as I mentioned, one of our communities does not have COLR, and in that community, it was up to the tribe to provide the service because no one else would, or at least to work with a local LEC until we could provide that service. So where COLR does not exist, unfortunately, profit-driven companies will skip any customers that are not profitable. And without COLR, people will get left behind because so much of California is rural. To the extent that where we have COLR providers, they are providing the service, as long as they maintain things like the backup power and maintain that their service works, it is providing public safety and it is keeping the needed communications up. But when for-profit companies don't always maintain their networks to the fullest extent or don't build the redundancies in because it's not profitable, sometimes they fail in their COLR obligations. And I think any changes to the program should make sure that any such situations are resolved and that the CPUC can monitor and make sure that COLR is met for everyone.
No, thank you. And I know you described it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about the community that you said doesn't currently have a COLR and how that came about?
I don't know how it came about. It's been that way for the last 20 years, as far as I know. This is the community of Wairika on Interstate 5 in the North State, a little bit north of Reading. The two phone companies available there are AT&T and Calor Communications. And, you know, about 17 years ago when I started for the tribe, the tribal housing is on the side of a hill on the edge of town, and AT&T was providing DSL to the town, but the tribal housing was just out of DSL range. So the rest of the town had DSL, the tribal housing didn't. When the cable company came in and provided service, the tribe couldn't afford to pay the cable company to bring cable into the tribal housing, and the cable company decided not to do that on their own dime. So cable internet became available for the entire community except the tribal housing. So, you know, if you were a tribal member living in tribal housing, you were still on dial-up, where everyone else in the town had faster cable or DSL. We worked with, during the Obama Recovery Act, to work with the local providers to get broadband funds in, where they finally installed fiber to the tribal community and they were able to get internet. But it was a long effort that took, you know, many years before the tribal housing was served, because there was no carrier of last resort. There was no requirement to serve the tribal housing, and funding meant that it was not profitable for them to do so. So the tribe had to provide the funds before the community was served.
Does the tribal housing that you're talking about, do they have landlines?
They do have landline phones, yes. So it wasn't necessarily a public safety issue, and the community has cell service for that matter. But in this case, it was broadband that wasn't available to them.
No, thank you for that clarification. Has that community had any issues or concerns with their landline service?
Not to my knowledge, other than sometimes a little bit of crackling or static on the lines if you're way out in the edge of town. But for the most part, the call quality has been fine, and call connectivity has been working.
Okay, thank you. I want to also give each of our panelists an opportunity to provide us with any additional information that they think might be helpful as we're reevaluating our COLR rules and looking at what potential changes may be needed. And given the circumstances, you know, a lot has changed in the last 30 years, whether it's, you know, the technology, generational issues, as well as we're seeing with the climate and especially in high fire threat areas for resiliency issues. What is it that you would like us to know as we're looking at how to move forward with this rulemaking and potential changes to the current regulations? We'll start with the chairman.
Obviously, when you talk about prosperity in the state as far as tribal nations go, we're in a different environment. Obviously, each of us have a different state that we're in, but we just celebrated, as this facility said, our 30-year anniversary of our first real economic development driver in the gaming industry here. And so our tribes have grown exponentially from our participation side. I think what needs to continue going forward in the rulemaking process, no matter what it is, we're talking about COLR today, it's that communication between the tribal governments and the CPUC and the state. And making sure that we have the interest in, you know, we get the information and we're able to respond, which we are, which it is a complete different environment than I imagine anybody sitting in the room who are serving in a state agency over the past 30 years. So I think the thing going forward for Middletown Rancheria is allowing us to be in that participation, to be at the table and to have the conversations. And I know we're here doing that today, but having comment back. So as the rulemaking changes coming out, making sure that we're really getting in and we're inspiring the other tribes who aren't here today or maybe not online to really give that feedback on how they're being affected on their individual tribal lands and understanding that conversation. So I think that's what it is. That's my comments from this. Middletown Rancheria appreciates the opportunity to be on the panel today. but we need to follow up, obviously, and follow through and make sure any of the conversations we did have today are followed up on our own with written comments as we're following these things through. So I think it's participation and communication, and I know we've come a long ways, and we just need to continue that from my standpoint.
Thank you. Eric, do you have anything that you'd like us to think about as we're moving forward with the rulemaking?
Yes, I'm personally an advocate for broadband, and I think that broadband should be available to all people. And I would argue terrestrial broadband is important. Satellite can be valuable, but terrestrial broadband is what most people need. However, I think if you polled the community members and the tribal membership, what they're going to tell you is that they want cell service. They want cell service everywhere. They want it at their homes. They want it along the roads. And I think from their perspective and from a public safety perspective, if there's any way that the state can mandate cellular service for every community and every state highway, that's going to solve a lot of public safety issues, and it's going to provide the service that the community really, really wants and demands. We had a forest fire in our community that had no cell service, and the forest fire crew brought in a cell on wheels, a cow, and the community was chaining themselves to it to when it was about to drive away. They didn't want it to leave. They were so invested in having cell service, and they had it for a couple of weeks and then it was gone, and it was incredibly painful. So I would say that from a public safety perspective, from what the community members want, cellular service is probably the most vital.
Thank you. Commissioner Reynolds, did you have any comments or questions for the panel?
Well, first, I wanted to thank both of you for participating in today's panel, and I really appreciate the perspectives you've shared. I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a window into your tribal members and issues of affordability around communication service and how that's affecting your tribal members.
Affordability, everything's going up, whether it's your power bill, your phone bill, or everything. I think for our carrier here, and just speak from my own personal experiences, for just a phone service and the internet, you're paying about $210. I mean, it's not cheap. Not as much in other communities, I guess, but still it's a challenge. And then the service you get with it. That is always a challenge in a conversation. That's why I think mobile service, broadband, all these things, and we are working on things, obviously. We don't expect this just to be provided, even though it should be. We are also doing backup plans where we can work together in partnership to make sure that we meet these goals and needs of our people. But it is a challenge, especially with our elders. And I always go back to that. Our elders and our children are most greatest assets that we have in our tribal nations, and making sure that those folks have what they need, because it's two different generations. With the elders, it's that complete communication through however they want to do it, the landline, the old ways, or the younger generations when you got 5 kids in the home and all of them got to be on a computer to do anything. It makes it a challenge on that broadband, the bandwidth and everything else. So I think there's many different challenges we're dealing with at this time, at least at the Middletown Rancheria. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got stuff planned as we move forward. But it's still a challenge, and affordability is one of those things that we always deal with. But we find a way to make sure that our elders are taken care of, that we can do these things. But hopefully in the future, we can work on that affordability conversation together. Just because you're mandated doesn't mean that you're going to provide it at a rate that people can afford. And that's a conversation I think that always needs to happen as we're growing these abilities. So, like I said, rural areas always a challenge, and Lake County being one of the most rural areas, and fixed income, not only for the Rancheria, the other tribal nations, but a lot of our residents here in Lake County are on fixed income. And I think that's very important because we want to do everything we can to support elders to stay in their homes as long as they feel like they need to, or they want to, or able to do that. And I think the conversations we're having today are really important to make that happen.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to add?
Yes, I agree with the chairman. Affordability is a very important issue. Um, as much as possible, I think it would be great for carriers of last resort and any carriers to be required to offer a low income plan. But I would say that for a large portion of the tribal membership and the communities that we serve, the Lifeline programs are absolutely vital. And we have a very large uptake. In fact, in one of our communities, the carrier of last resort will just ask everybody that signs up for service if they want the Lifeline because probably more than half their customers are using it. So having programs like Lifeline to supplement, because providing these services in rural areas is not cost effective. That's why the for-profit companies aren't doing it. So having some kind of supplemental program like Lifeline or like what the FCC did for a while with the broadband supplements, that can be very vital. And then maybe it's not always on the carrier itself to provide the affordability, but there needs to be something to provide for the affordability for the low income and for the people that can barely afford it. I know when the Kirk Tribe launched our ISP in the community of Orleans in 2015, we ordered a circuit from the local carrier of last resort. And I priced that circuit in Orleans, and I went and priced that circuit in Redding, and it was 10 times more expensive, 1,000% more expensive in Orleans. And that's just the cost of doing business. That's how much it costs to get that circuit out there. But it means that that cost is passed on to the customers, and there's no other way to afford it without some kind of supplemental program.
Thank you. Thank you both for participating today and sharing your perspectives on these important issues with us. And we'll continue to reach out as the rulemaking goes forward to make sure that we're getting that perspective and taking it into account. I think that closes up the panel for today, but I think we've got just a little bit more time. So if there is anything else, I know I've just asked you that, but I'll ask you one more time if there's just anything else you want us to know.
You know, from a tribal perspective, just like I said again, honored to have everyone here today for this hearing. The communications both from at the state level has just improved exponentially. I've been the tribal chairman since 1997. You know, so this initial rulemaking even outdates me, you know, as we move forward. And having that tribal voice from my perspective is so important now. We're in such a different position to participate and to really not be in the silos that we were for years before. And I think that's critical to all of our success as Californians as we move forward. So, no, I just honored to be here today and have everyone in this. And I know everybody's online. I will say, yeah, internet and, you know, technology is great, but when it comes down to, let's talk about natural disaster, earthquake, fires, anything else that'll be happening, floods. I think it's important that we're always able to communicate with each other and do it. We heard a conversation about the cow, and I think there's many different acronyms as you move this forward, and hotspots and everything else. But technology is great, but really being able to communicate with each other during those natural disasters are so important, because the rural areas are the ones where it'll take time to get those the major responses out. And I think as you talk to Indian country from that perspective, it's something we have always dealt with, but we're making headway in these conversations that we're having. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Eric, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, please. We've been talking a lot about public safety, and I think public safety might be the most important reason for bringing carriers of last resort out and making sure that all Californians have access to some kind of communication service. But there's also lots of other benefits too. I just want to get on the record, you know, healthcare and education and economic development and workforce development, government communications. All of these are very important. And having these connections, whether it's cellular or broadband or landline service, is vital for all of these different community growth options. And making sure that all communities have access to this is what's going to allow those communities to develop, to improve their economies, to teach their children, to have health care, which is not always available. And so I think that's vital. I also want to echo the chairman's comments. I want to thank the CPUC for doing outreach to tribes. It has gotten a lot better in the last few years. Commissioner Hauk has actually visited us on our tribal land. We thank her for coming up. This has been a night and day change, and it's very valuable, and we really appreciate that you allow us to have a voice.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you again for being here today and providing this important perspective. And we recognize that you're representing two of many tribes in California that are addressing these issues and speaking for your individual tribes, and hope to hear from other tribes that may be listening in on this, and we'll continue to do outreach as we move the rulemaking forward. So thank you. Turn it back over to Commissioner Reynolds.
I will similarly thank our panelists. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for sharing your perspectives. We are running a little ahead of schedule, so I'm going to check with our IT team to see if we have the state panel online.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Is that what?
Okay, let's take a brief break. We'll take a 5-minute break.
And for folks in the house, the restrooms are directly down the hallway back there. I don't know if we had something up there, directly down the hallway.
I know Randy Brown said he would join at 11:15, although he just emailed a couple minutes ago.
Hello, Mr. Brown. Are you available to do a audio check?
Thank you.
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. And did you want to test your video?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Are you able? Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank
We
you.
can see you.
Good morning. I assume you can hear me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Bennett.
Great.
Sorry about the muffled mic.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hello, Mr. Bennett.
This is actually Mike Grant.
Hello, Mr. Grant.
Hello.
My apologies.
No worries.
I can hear you and I can see you.
Perfect.
All right. We are going to turn next to perspectives from other states in our region. So I'm honored to moderate this panel with several wonderful panelists from Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, and I will ask each of my panelists to briefly introduce themselves. So I'll turn first to Commissioner Brown from Nevada.
Morning, Commissioner Reynolds. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Randy Brown. I'm a commissioner at the Nevada Public Utilities Commission. I was appointed to the commission in September of 2023 by Governor Lombardo. So I'm 18 months into my 2-year term. And for transparency purposes, I wanted to be clear. I spent 26 years at AT&T, retiring in 2023. Just prior to my appointment to the commission, during my tenure at AT&T, I was responsible for both the passage of the enabling COLR legislation, which was in 2013, and I was also responsible for several subsequent applications for COLR relief in Nevada. And I'm looking forward to being part of the panel. Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. And Sean Bennett from Washington.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. Sean Bennett. I'm a section manager here in the telecommunications section at the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. I've been with the commission since about 2016, where I worked as a regulatory analyst and then as a senior regulatory analyst for the last 2 years. We have a small team. We're small but mighty, but deal with a lot of things for the tariffs for our traditionally rate of return regulated telecom companies, then also ETCs. We administered a small state universal communication services program and really just do what we can to help advance universal service. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael Grant from Oregon.
Good morning, Commissioner Reynolds. Mike Grant, a longtime employee at the Public Utility Commission here in Oregon, been here over 30 years. Spent most of my time here as an administrative law judge or chief administrative law judge. I've been around long enough to have been an arbitrator, conducting arbitrations under the 1996 Federal Telco Act. Most recently, I served as executive director from about 2018 to last June. During that time, I did lead an investigation into the carrier of last resort obligation here in Oregon, as directed by the legislature, and I'll be sharing some of our findings from that investigation. So thanks for having me.
Welcome, and thank you all for being here with us. I'd like to start with kind of an overview prompt, and perhaps we can go in the same order. So could you each please provide a general overview of the status of carrier of last resort obligations in your state and which carriers generally are covered by those obligations? And do you retain any legal obligations for specific carriers to serve customers? Commissioner Brown?
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. I'm going to share my experience in Nevada related to the subject matter, but it's not my intention to suggest that California must or should follow suit. I think each state's regulatory authority best understands the landscape in which their utilities operate. I'm simply going to share details about the regulatory landscape in Nevada and what has transpired since the passage of our enabling legislation. I also want to be clear that I'm speaking on behalf of myself today and that my views are my own and may not necessarily be the views of my fellow commissioners in Nevada. And with that, the regulatory framework in Nevada provides a path for COLR relief for telecommunications providers who have been designated as competitive suppliers in Nevada. And of the original ILECs, that is primarily AT&T and Lumen, with Frontier having a very small area of its service territory in which they are classified as a competitive supplier. All other ILECs in Nevada are classified as small-scale providers of last resort, and they are not eligible to participate or take advantage of this enabling legislation. AT&T and Lumen are the largest providers in Nevada, and their service territories cover the vast majority of the population in Nevada. Probably more than 90% of the households in Nevada are covered by those two carriers. And while the small scale providers of last resort are primarily the small rural carriers with a small percentage of households in their service territories, their geographic footprint is much larger than AT&T's and Lumen's. Both AT&T and Lumen have filed numerous applications for COLA relief in Nevada, and each application has been granted. Lumen has no COLA obligation today, with the exception of a small affiliate company that is a small scale provider of last resort, and AT&T has been relieved of the obligation for more than 99% of the households in its service territory in Nevada. I think that answers the question, unless you have something additional, Commissioner.
I think it does, and I think we'll have some more questions to follow up. I think on how service looks for some of the more remote parts of Nevada. But I will turn next to Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I also just did want to start out and mention that anything I say is certainly my views. I am commission staff, separate and apart from the commissioners, but just wanted to share our experience as we've kind of gone through this process. Here in the state of Washington, competitively classified companies do have the ability to discontinue service by following the notice requirements outlined in the rule. However, incumbent local exchange carriers, both large and small, generally have tariffs. And I say generally because there are two entities where that is slightly different. But for all of the 18 small incumbent local exchange carriers, they do offer service as required under their tariff. And if they did want to discontinue service, they would need to amend their tariff, which would mean going before the open meeting process. Staff would analyze that, ask questions, and depending on the results, would then go forward with arbitration. There are 18 small rural ILECs. We also do have 6 large ILECs, although 5 of those are CenturyLink. They are the affiliated companies. And then we also do have what used to be Frontier, but is now Ziply Fiber. Each of these companies did seek competitive classification. Frontier actually received their services as being deemed as competitive. However, in that order, the commission required that company, if it wants to discontinue service, to file a petition and seek approval. Since that time, they haven't petitioned for discontinuance. Likewise, CenturyLink also does have, they are operating an alternative form of regulation. And if they wanted to seek to discontinue service, they would need to petition the commission for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. And Judge Grant?
Yes. So in Oregon, the COLA obligations were assigned as part of the original process to allocate service territories or local exchanges. So when an incumbent local exchange carrier was granted an exclusive service territory, they were required to provide service to customers within that territory. That has remained unchanged despite the sweeping changes in the telecom world. There have been some changes changing the way we regulate the incumbent local exchange carriers. In 2002, the legislature adopted some changes that allowed the commission to have alternative forms of regulation. Like Washington, we have Lumen or CenturyLink and Ziply Fiber. They both are operating under price plans. That legislation allowed the commission to waive a lot of numerous statutory provisions in order to reduce regulatory burdens. But COLA was not one that the commission was given authority to change. The scope of COLA is limited. First of all, to ILECs allocate an exclusive service territory, and in the scope of the service, it's just limited to providing local exchange telecommunications service to all customers in a non-discriminatory manner. So basically requires these entities provide only basic voice communications, which the PUC is defined as a retail telecommunications service that is single party, has voice grade or equivalent transmission parameters and dial tone capability, and provides local exchange calling. So I think most of us are pretty familiar with the term POTS, Plano Telephone Service. The competitive local exchange carriers are obligated to provide service to customers in the exchanges in which they operate. However, there is no requirement they provide that service on a non-discriminatory basis. Oregon has 33 certified incumbent local exchange carriers and 267 local exchanges across the state. Two large ILECs, as mentioned, Lumen, which has more than half of those of the 155 exchanges, Ziply Fiber, which has 54 exchanges, and then we have the 31 rural ILECs, which, like the Commissioner from Nevada talked about, a much smaller number of customers, but very large service areas in the rural parts of the state, and they have a combined total of 58 exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you. And Judge Grant, I'm going to stay with you for a moment here. As I understand it, Oregon's PUC examined the continuing value of carrier of last resort obligations in 2019. Could you talk a little bit about the key findings identified in that process? Are there findings around the need for COLR obligations or landline service that you identified? And are there challenges about COLR reform that were identified in the course of that process? And could you also speak generally to the role that broadband access played in COLR reform in Oregon?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, as I mentioned, 2019, the legislature asked us to take a look at the continuing need and relevance of the COLR obligations. I believe this was done at the request of a lot of the two large ILECs who were asking for some relief from the obligation to serve. The legislature asked that we specifically look at three things: customers facing challenges to access telecommunications services, including low-income customers, what access customers had to land-based service alternatives, either through the competitive local exchange carriers or voice over internet or cable TV or cellular providers. And then last, the availability and comparability of voice service offered by wireless internet service providers and satellite providers. We held a total of 5 workshops. Our process was rather unique. Instead of quickly opening up an investigation like most public utility commissions do, we actually began with broad outreach to stakeholders because we knew that there was a need to get a lot of really good information from some non-traditional stakeholders to help inform the commission's examination here. So we had a lot of outreach with local governments, rural communities, emergency providers, low-income advocates, and tribal governments. And from that input, we designed a workshop that had a total of 5 workshops. The first 2 were focused on level setting and information sharing about the somewhat unique regulatory framework governing telecommunications. We prepared a white paper. Those 2 workshops were held in person on January and February 2020. We all remember what happened soon thereafter when the pandemic hit. So the final 3 workshops were held over Zoom. Obviously, the one silver lining of the pandemic really kind of helped remind us of the importance of communication and obviously had an influence on the investigation. But we looked at the final 3 workshops, looked on the industry trends, technologies, and policy drivers. Also looked at potential impacts of COLR relief, and then also addressing specific proposals. The other key thing that we did is we had a survey that we promoted through statewide media outfits, numerous organizations, and our stakeholders. We also partnered with local organizations And we had over 2,600 Oregonians respond to the survey, representing all 36 counties. It was really valuable that we were able to get such good percentage of folks from respondents from the rural areas, with just about half of those being in rural areas, 24% in small towns, 15% in suburban areas, and 13% in urban areas. And the largest age group was 65 and over, which comprised almost half of the respondents. As far as the key findings go, we found that landline service remains very important to Oregonians. I found that about 2,500 customers have landlines due to lack of competition, service quality, or health concerns. To put that in perspective, Oregon is about a tenth the size of California. We have about 4 million residents. We all know the decrease in the number of landline customers served by the incumbent, but as competitive options have increased, and due to this, as competitive options have increased, residential customers have shifted away to cutting the cord. In 2018, nearly 2/3 of the residential households in Oregon had no landline service. But our survey demonstrated that while many Oregonians have a preference for cellular or other competitive options, the remaining landline customers have expressed continued reliance on their landline service for reasons that include lack of access or reliable cell service, reliance on special landline services, customer preference, and lack of competitive options. Competition has not eliminated the need for Kohler, as competitive providers are not required to serve remote or high-cost areas. And the non-terrestrial service options at that time were found to be unreliable. So the survey found that the market remains moderately concentrated and not competitive, and customer options in a lot of areas of the state are limited, especially for residential service. We found that 96% of the customers own a cell phone, and 91% indicated it's very important to have access to cell service. But did find that the cell industry was more competitively imbalanced between rural and urban areas than the landline industry. We also found that the incumbent carriers could be relieved of Kohler obligations in some urban areas with minimal impacts due to the competitive alternatives. However, there are key challenges in determining whether Kohler relief could be provided without harm to customers, because so much of it requires proprietary competitive service data, and the FCC's regulation limits our ability to ensure the customers are protected. Obtaining information as to the availability of competitive services offered by cellular, cable, broadband, fixed wireless, and satellite providers is not within the Commission's authority. These providers are under no obligation to share such information, which they consider to be proprietary and highly confidential. Many of the providers do provide broad coverage maps, but they generally lack specificity and do not necessarily guarantee service to every customer located within indicated service areas. For example, as you probably know, the availability and quality of the non-terrestrial based services, cellular and satellite, is highly dependent upon geography and local conditions. The irony or biggest limitation of the Kohler obligation is the fact that it mandates the provision of a service, plain old telephone service, which is outdated. As society becomes increasingly dependent on the internet, customer needs are shifting away from traditional voice telephony and towards broadband access. This shift was reflected in our survey. 98% respondents reported that access to the internet was important or very important, while only 42% reported the same for voice landline service. Examining the continuing relevance of Kohler obligations is complicated by the fact that our state and our nation has not fully completed a transition to universal broadband. A quarter of Oregonians live in areas that are unconnected, unserved, or underserved, or have older technologies that will not be able to meet the digital demands in the near future. Of all respondents, 84% reported they currently have broadband internet at their residence. It's a high number, but also reveals that 16% of the population is lacking access. 37% of those reported that their internet was provided via satellite. 26% said cable modem, and 14% was DSL lines. Notably, only 50% of respondents were somewhat satisfied or very satisfied with the quality and availability of the internet in their area. Meeting the broad policy goal of universal access to broadband internet access would obviously effectively moot the need for COLR obligations for voice telephony, as broadband service can provide both information and telecommunications service. Ideally, the telecommunication and information service policies, including COLR, would be unified and aligned to promote infrastructure investment in broadband service. A complicated jurisdictional landscape, however, presents barriers to achieving that goal. Many challenges exist with unifying the treatment of providers that are subject to different regulatory obligations, but increasingly providing services toward the ubiquitous goal of broadband access. As noted, as you're aware, the state's authority is primarily limited to voice, while broadband is currently classified as an advanced telecommunications service and subject to the exclusive jurisdiction of the FCC. Big challenge, obviously, is the fact that the federal broadband policy currently favors market competition over regulation, which does not guarantee service to all customers. Without some action by the FCC providing states greater authority to regulate broadband access, it's questionable whether Oregon could create a territory allocation scheme for broadband carriers and assign COLR obligations to those carriers granted territory. So in the end, the commission submitted its report to the legislature, I think probably due to the fact that the pandemic was ongoing and there was such an increased focus and demand and need for service in rural areas. The legislature decided not to take any action on COLR relief, and neither of the two large carriers have pursued any official actions to relieve themselves of the COLR obligations.
Thank you. That's very, very interesting to hear. And do you happen to know how that survey was distributed? That's a pretty tremendous response rate.
Yeah, we fortunately we had a new guy in our telecom group who was very good with that data, and he developed the survey, and we really pushed it out to the initial broad outreach we did and trying to design the process gave us a lot of really good contacts, and we followed up by sending links to that survey, and I can get you and your staff more information about how we push that out there. But yeah, we were quite pleased with the broad response rate and the coverage that we got.
Wonderful, thank you. Turning next to Mr. Bennett. I understand that there is a pending settlement agreement on COLR obligations for one particular ILEC in Washington. I won't ask you to provide analysis or opinions, but would you please provide a general factual explanation of what is in that pending settlement agreement?
Yeah, I'd certainly be happy to. We did receive a competitive classification petition from CenturyLink in early 2024. After working on that initial petition, staff filed our initial response testimony, at which point, and both before and after that, commission staff, public counsel, as well as the CenturyLink companies worked on settlement negotiations. Ultimately, we came to an agreement, and by that I mean staff and CenturyLink came to an agreement and had a settlement agreement in principle, and we went to the hearing earlier in March. Public counsel did not support the settlement agreement, but they did not object to it either. And that's, I believe, because it really does try to ensure that no consumers will be stranded. It essentially created a discontinuance process for CCLs, and the CCL is a challenging consumer location. So essentially, what the parties settled on was a process where the company identifies those locations within their service area, and if it's a CCL, then they would need to petition the commission for approval to discontinue service to those locations. And that was done using the FCC's broadband availability data as well as mobile availability data, and tying that information to the fabric, and then associating each of those individual location points with one of CenturyLink's customers. If it's a CCL, they would need approval. However, if it's not a CCL, there is a very thorough and detailed process that CenturyLink would need to follow. And ultimately, what the CCL definition is it would be considered a CCL if there were not two non-affiliated providers offering service. And that can be either fixed internet service or 5G service. The fixed internet service would need to be at least 25 down 3 megabits per second upload and download. And their specific price for that, their non-promotional price, would need to be below the FCC's reasonable voice comparability benchmark, which at that time was $55.13. Once CenturyLink essentially identified whether or not there were CCLs or not, if there were no CCLs, they could begin to go through that enhanced discontinuance process. And just to give you a few key areas of it, there are limitations to what the company, how many petitions they can do each year. They can not do any more than 3 petitions per year, with a maximum of 250 locations per petition. And they cannot do more than 500 locations in any calendar year. By putting these kind of limits in place, it will kind of create these guardrails in place for CenturyLink to have a process that they can go through, but just to make sure that both staff and public counsel have the bandwidth to kind of go through it and validate that information. Not only is it limit the number of petitions that they can do, but they also are required to use the fabric in identifying whether a location that they want to discontinue is a CCL or not. It does use, like I said, the fixed internet availability data, which companies are reporting to the FCC. The FCC has their own validation just to make sure it's actually available as they define it. But then on top of that, CenturyLink will actually validate that that service is available by going to the consumer, or by going to the provider's website and validating that it's actually available. At which point they will then send a notice to consumers, essentially providing them with an opportunity to refute whether that service is actually available or not. As I mentioned, it does include wireless. The challenging thing with wireless is on the FCC's map, it does say this information is not intended for in the home. And so in the creation of that definition, the parties were able to agree to a 5G service limit, which essentially goes to show that it's more likely than not available. I can't provide the specific numbers, but in my testimony, I can say that for those non-CCLs, a very high percentage of those locations with at least 2 5G providers also had 3 or more 5G providers. They also had a very high number of 4G providers and even a higher number of 3G providers, which in totality, when you have 3 different providers offering these different technologies, it's more likely than not to actually be there. However, recognizing that the FCC's fabric and the broadband availability data is really an iterative process and getting better with time, there essentially is a process built into this where a consumer can challenge if one of those 5G services aren't available. And if they do challenge that, either the company would be able to accept their statement and consider it as CCL, which means they would then have to go back for commission approval, or CenturyLink would be able to do a mobile strength benchmark test, either inside that location if the consumer is willing, or if they aren't willing, at the closest available public land. That benchmark has not yet been established. As I mentioned when I first started talking, this is a pending settlement agreement that the commission has not yet decided. So it could look like this if it's accepted without condition, or there could be conditions, or it ultimately could be denied. But ultimately, there's that mobile strength benchmark that will be set if this is approved in its current form. But it also did this structure provided transition assistance to individuals that are on low income support. So if it turns out they have 2 fixed internet providers available to that location, essentially CenturyLink would either consider them a CCL if that price for installation is above $150, or they would be willing to cover the cost for that installation above $150. Similarly, for mobile, they also would be willing to provide a consumer that says that is on a low income program or support, to essentially provide them with up to, I believe it's $50 or $150 for the installation charge, as well as the phone if it's not otherwise provided for by another program. Lastly, this requirement also does create a digital ambassadorship program for consumers at CenturyLink to essentially help individuals with this process, because change can be difficult, and infrastructure going from POTS to being able to use cellular service or VoIP or broadband is not always the most easiest process. And so they did create kind of this structure to help individuals with this transition and really to help them kind of walk through it. And all of this is set up initially on a pilot program. We've spent over a year kind of working through this process, or variations of this process. I think there are a total of 9 kind of items in the settlement agreement. This is just one of those items, and I can definitely go elsewhere if you'd like, but focusing on this one, we try to envision kind of every scenario or circumstance just to ensure that no consumers are stranded, because once a company does discontinue service, if there's nothing else out there, it's not possible to ring that bell. So we did design a pilot program, which will essentially run for the first 3 discontinuance instances. And at the end of that program, if there are any issues or concerns by the commission, the company, commission staff, or public counsel, we can work through that and try to find common solutions to put forth a recommendation to change the pilot program so that it's not concrete. We can make changes to further improve it and make sure that it is working as effectively as we think it will, to ensure that no consumers are left behind. And I know I unpacked a lot there, so if you have any questions about the CCL definition or some of that other enhanced process, I'm certainly able and willing to dive in. But it is a docket UT 240029, and more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you for walking us through that settlement and pilot. I do want to turn next to Commissioner Brown from Nevada. In your opening, you spoke a little bit about the difference between areas that retain a provider of last resort and those that don't. Can you talk a little bit further about the process for withdrawing from provider of last resort and how the determination is made in Nevada that the obligation is no longer necessary in certain areas of the state?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. The process in Nevada is this. Carriers are required to file an application for relief with the commission, and there is a 180-day shot clock attached to the adjudication of the application. Carriers are required to file detailed maps of the areas for which they're seeking relief, and they're required to demonstrate the availability of alternative providers consistent with the statute. The competitive test can be one wired alternative and one of any other alternative technology excluding satellite. Or it can be two wireless alternatives or three of any technology excluding satellite. And I would just mention that this enabling legislation was passed in 2013. There's been no modifications to that legislation to date, but there is a bill pending at the Nevada legislature right now to allow the competitive test to include satellite providers. When this bill was passed, 15 years ago or so, 12 years ago or so, satellite was not as advanced and affordable and ubiquitous as it is today. And so there is a pending change at the legislature. The law in Nevada also requires things like customer notifications, meetings with law enforcement agencies in the affected areas, meetings with the public safety answering point personnel in affected areas, and it also requires the applicant to hold a consumer session in every single county in which they're seeking relief. And those consumer sessions include representatives from the applicant. It includes the state's Bureau of Consumer Protection and the Attorney General's office. It includes commission staff, and it includes the commission itself. The legislation in Nevada included a safety net provision as well, that for approximately 3 years after the passage, if a customer did not have access to an alternative provider, they could file a request for service from the commission, and if the commission determined there was in fact no alternative, the commission could order the carrier previously relieved of the obligation to provide service for that residential customer. I can tell you that since the legislation has been in place, no such requests were filed that using that provision, and that provision sunset about 9 years ago. Carriers granted COLA relief are prohibited from accessing the Nevada Universal Service High Cost Fund, but they are eligible to access that fund for low income or lifeline subscribers, provided that there's still an ETC in the state. And so that's sort of the path and how that works. I will say one thing, Commissioner Reynolds, is that in the early stages of these applications, what applicants were using is, coverage maps provided by other carriers to demonstrate coverage. And as been said before, sometimes those weren't exactly precise. And I will tell you, in the most recent application filed by AT&T in Nevada, they used the FCC's broadband map. And while I think it's open to discussion about the accuracy of those maps, others have said that there's a process in place for challenging any discrepancies that consumers may find in those maps. And I will tell you, in the state of Nevada, the Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, which is the Governor's broadband office, filed 80,000 challenges to the FCC's map in Nevada. So lots of parties are looking at these maps, and I think it's the best tool we have available today. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And sticking with you, Commissioner Brown, could you give us a sense for what percentage of the state continues to have provider of last resort obligations? And could you talk a little bit further about the rationale for polar relief in much of Nevada? Are there benefits that you could describe that have been observed for customers and the public? And could you talk about some of the steps that Nevada has taken to prevent any negative impacts from withdrawal from polar?
Yes, absolutely. From a customer or a household perspective, I'd guess that between 90 and 95% of the households or customer locations in Nevada have no COLA in place at all. From a geographic perspective, as I sort of alluded to previously, while I don't have specific percentages, but because of Nevada's highly rural nature and the fact that more than 80% of our land is owned by the federal government, I would suggest that well more than half of the geography in the state is still covered by a COLR obligation. And again, that's going to be the small scale providers of last resort, primarily the rural ILECs. The steps that Nevada has taken to prevent negative impacts related to COLR withdrawal is there have been no negative impacts in Nevada as a result of the commission granting relief. I would point out that no carrier has withdrawn service, even when they have the authority to do so in Nevada. To the best of my knowledge, no consumer complaints have been received as a result of COLR relief granted in Nevada. So, you know, I think when the legislation was passed originally, you know, the 3-year safety net that was placed in there was to sort of test the waters to see if there were going to be issues that arose as a result of this withdrawal. And as I stated, there have been none.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Commissioner Haug to see if she has any questions or follow-up questions for our panelists here.
So I have a question for Judge Grant. Just like Oregon, California has a lot of rural, difficult geography. And just can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and issues that you identified either in your investigation or that you're seeing from some of the more rural or hard to reach customers on the quality of service that they're getting, or looking at some of the potential impacts? I know you mentioned the pandemic and not moving forward with any determinations after that, and given how critical we're seeing communication services is to be after the pandemic, just what Oregon is looking at to, I guess, make sure people are being served, and if there's anything you can add about, you know, further thinking that the state is considering as we grapple with the need for COLR and the need to make sure that we're serving customers, especially hard to reach customers in difficult geographies.
Yeah, sure thing, Commissioner. Yeah, I guess it goes without saying, but I want to remind folks our survey and our investigation was in 2020, so it is somewhat dated, particularly in the world of technology. With communications, things are changing so quick, and there's, you know, I know there's a lot of federal money helping address broadband access and a lot more satellite development. But basically, you know, the survey had a lot of really good information, and I can get you a link to all that data that's on our website. But it basically found no surprises, but actually, I guess it was a surprise about just how highly dependent it was on just local geography and tree coverage and other local conditions that really impacted the folks' ability to have consistent and reliable broadband access or cell coverage. We looked at a lot of the national maps and other reports of kind of coverage in the different areas. And we had some participants who did a really good job of providing some, you know, boots on the ground type of analysis where they went out there and kind of compared what they actually were able to receive based on local conditions there, and comparing that to the maps that showed that, yeah, this area should have plenty of coverage, but in fact did not, or didn't have it in a reliable manner. And there's also just seasonal issues too with, you know, cloud cover and rain and wind. And I think that the biggest thing too, that given the timing, not only do we have the pandemic, but in 2020 we had those Labor Day fires that, you know, burned huge parts of the state. And it really kind of helped focus on the need that, you know, when disaster strikes, often, you know, the most reliable phone service is the old landlines. They don't require a power source. they don't have batteries or need to be recharged. And again, it's really kind of underscored the need to make sure that we have folks are connected and able to communicate, particularly in times when communications is most important.
Thank you. And then another question for Commissioner Brown. There's been a lot of discussion about POTS and landline and wireless, but you had also mentioned satellite, and that Nevada may be looking at some changes or is looking at it either expanding. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that Nevada's doing in coordination on satellite and where that potentially fits into COLR obligations?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. My understanding is that, when this legislation was passed in 2013, satellite was available, but it was extremely costly. It required a separate type of handset that was also costly. It reminded me more of like a phone in a box rather than the mobile phone you keep in your pocket today. And with the evolution of technology, I think during the Super Bowl, in fact, this year, there was an advertisement from one of the carriers that your existing handset would operate on a regular wireless network that is in place today. But in the event that the wireless network was not present, that same handset would move to satellite to be able to provide voice-grade access. And so I believe that the intent in Nevada is just to say that this technology has evolved to the point that it is comparable in most instances to either wireless or some other available technology. So when conducting the competitive test, if this legislation passes, satellite will be available for the carrier or the applicant to say this is a viable alternative to the customer.
Thank you.
I'd like to offer one additional prompt for each of our panelists, and I'll give you a bit of a dealer's choice. Either are there some closing thoughts that you have, or something that you'd like to share with respect to carrier of last resort that you haven't had a chance to touch on during this panel, that you want to share with this group? And I'd like to kind of preface by recognizing that we're all Western states, and we share a lot in common in terms of geography, in terms of population distribution, and in terms of some of the disasters that many of our communities confront, and some of the risks that they face. So I wonder, thinking about your own state as a Western state, the current status of your COLR rules, and kind of understanding that we're in the process of evaluating our rules for the future, are there either some summation remarks you'd like to offer, or some advice for us, or something that you'd like to mention that you haven't had a chance to speak to yet? And I'll turn first to Judge Grant.
Thanks, Commissioner. I guess, again, preface, I didn't do this, but the other two panelists did, but these opinions are solely my own, not that of the commission. I think the thing that I was struck throughout the process is that, particularly here in Oregon, the COLR obligation was imposed on these carriers in exchange for exclusive service territories to provide telecommunications service to customers in this geographic area. Obviously, with the passage of the 96 Act that brought competition to the local exchanges, and the technological changes with cellular service and cable service and the internet, the regulatory compact on which the COLR obligation was based seems to have been very modified on the one side. And I am sympathetic to the challenges facing the incumbent local exchange carriers, who are still required to carry this burden alone, despite the significant loss of customers. And it comes to a basic issue of economics, where it's hard for them to support making the needed investments in areas when they have such a shrinking base of customers in order to recoup those costs. And so it's a very challenging and difficult issue in many ways. Making sure that customers are protected, have access, and are able to be connected, but also making sure that the utilities providing those services have the sufficient revenue to be able to provide that. And then, of course, just the overlay of broadband access and the different regulatory jurisdictions there that present challenges. It's just a very complicated puzzle, and I wish California good luck on focusing that, and we'll be sitting by and looking to see what best practices you adopt, and something hopefully we can help everybody involved here and address this issue.
Thank you, Judge Grant. Mr. Bennett?
Thanks, Commissioner. Judge Grant just nailed it. But it's a very dynamic and changing market. It's changed so much since I kind of came into the commission and the regulatory structure, but it's still developing, especially with so much going on both at the state level, but also at the federal level. RDOF is still going. Those companies have their first required obligation by the end of this year. There's BEAD funding that is either starting to go out or going out or will be going out hopefully soon. And then there's always the possibility of RDOF Phase 2, depending on how these other programs continue to deploy. So just trying to kind of balance and understand where all these different pots of money are today, but where they also will be tomorrow, and just making sure that consumers are protected and have services available to them is definitely not easy. And in the settlement agreement, in the pending settlement agreement, that structure, staff really believe that it is a process that a company could go through now, but as companies continue to deploy into the future, the structure is there to take that into account. So definitely just being forward-looking and making use of the incredible wealth of information out there. There's the FCC data in the fabric and other data, but the more data we can get, the easier it will be to make those decisions. But definitely appreciate the opportunity and look forward to seeing how California moves forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Commissioner Brown?
Thank you, Commissioner. Going last is not ideal in this situation, but Judge Grant, I think, summed it up very well. But I think it's important, and so I'm going to reiterate some of the same points. I think it's important to understand, first of all, where we came from. Kohler regulatory framework developed decades, perhaps even a century ago, when carriers were monopoly providers. And the framework was that of what I would call a carrot and a stick. The carrot was the awarding of an exclusive franchise area to serve customers. And the stick was that in exchange for that exclusivity, carriers were required to serve every customer in that territory. And fast forward to today, or I would actually submit fast forward to a decade ago, the carrot no longer exists. And all that exists is the stick. There is zero exclusivity, but the obligation to serve remains. And I think that's what Judge Grant was getting at. It's extremely one-sided. And I think it's without argument that consumers are choosing newer technologies, as others have mentioned, and they're abandoning landlines in droves. And I think, I'm not an economist, but I think it's also undisputed that there's a finite amount of capital available in the marketplace. And carriers are clamoring to spend limited resources on infrastructure that customers are demanding. This isn't the carrier forcing, these new technologies on customers. Customers are demanding this new technology. And when carriers are forced to spend money on networks that customers are abandoning, that leaves fewer resources for the newer and emerging technologies. And I just think, that we have to keep that in our mind as we're making the decisions about what signals we're going to send to providers in this arena. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel today, commissioners, and I too look forward to watching your progress and learning from what you all are doing in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. And I want to thank all of our panelists again for joining us. I really appreciate Oregon, Washington, and Nevada being generous and gracious with your time to share some of your experiences and the state of play for your own states with respect to care of last resort. So thank you again for joining us today. And with that, I think we can close this panel and we can turn next to lunch. So we're running a little bit ahead of time, but I think we can retain our return time of, I believe it's 1:25, 1:30. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our afternoon session at this workshop. We'll be kicking off the afternoon with a public safety panel moderated by Commissioner Houck, and I will hand it over to her.
Thank you. And yes, welcome back. So we have a another great panel this afternoon, and we're going to be looking at emergency response and safety issues. The panelists that we have are Matthew Kendall, Sheriff Mendocino County, Paul Trexel with the 911 branch for the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, and Sheriff Bingham of Lake County. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. I wanted to give each of you just a moment to make any brief opening statements to introduce yourself and talk about the work you do and how it relates to communication services. And then I've got some questions that I'll be asking, some of them to all of you and some of them to select individuals. So do you want to start, Sheriff Kendall?
Okay, we're going to figure out this microphone. And can everybody hear me? Because I've gotten to the age where I just can't quite hear myself anymore. So I'm the sheriff of Mendocino County. I've been with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office right at 3.5 decades now. I know it's hard to believe because I look so young and virile, but it's been 35 years. Mendocino County and a lot of our rural Northern California counties, we have to work together on all of these different issues, including our Office of Emergency Services, including disasters, floods, fires. Northern California has kind of become the land of biblical plagues over the last decade or so. Our 2017 wildfires were probably one of the most horrific events I've ever seen. But the way that Mendocino County works is our CEO, Ms. Darcy Antle, is the OES director, and I am her deputy director. I deal with all things response, and then she has planning, she has the recovery, all of these things that happen after the event and after the emergency. And so she and I have to be in lockstep on everything that we do during an emergency. The sheriff's office is also responsible for alert, warning. We're responsible for door-to-door evacuations. We've seen where we have to do that numerous times now. And of course, the other duties of the sheriff, which include keeping a patrol, keeping a jail, protecting the judges, and serving civils. And so in our smaller and more rural counties, we just have to wear a lot of hats. And one of the main things for me is it doesn't matter whether it's day-to-day operations or in the middle of an emergency, communication is the only way that we can manage these things. And in rural counties the size of mine, that's almost 3,500 square miles, not counting the portion of ocean that I own, that can be a real chore. It can be a real issue to have communications, especially in these areas that are not only geographically challenged, but topographically challenged. You know, we've got some places that, as my father used to say, they're just steeper than a cow's face, and getting people in and out of there is pretty tough. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trexel?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Paul Troxel. I'm the 911 branch manager, 988 systems director for the state of California. I started my career 30 years ago in 911 as a dispatcher, and I worked my way through the ranks as up to assistant manager for the city of Sacramento in the dispatch center, and then got promoted to manager of Placer County's Sheriff Dispatch Center. I spent 3 years as the manager there before this role in the state opened up. When I came to the state, I had a lot of understanding about 911 technology and the importance of 911 and in the real critical need to have quality network available, quality data available. I took this role. In the 911 branch, we're responsible for the technology of 911. It's the state's responsibility to get the 911 call, deliver the voice, deliver the location, make sure the location information is accurate, and we got to put it at the right PSAP or public safety answering point. In the state, we have 447 of those. These gentlemen here each have a dispatch center that we help support. So as we talk about the need of public safety communications, it's not just that voice call coming in, it's also the ability, you mentioned alert and warning, the ability of our public safety team to be able to alert the community after they've alerted us. If you look at the ecosystem of 911 call, somebody will call and say, I see smoke. The next call is, I see fire. And then the incident unfolds, it becomes an evacuation. Alert and warnings come in. So now the people who were just notified are now notifying and pushing information back out. And in some instances, there's two-way communication that has to go back and forth to gain additional intelligence. So as we look at advanced technologies and then the introduction of the wireless device, our ecosystem has really changed. So I think it's very important that we keep these conversations out in front of us, and we make sure that we're collaborating from the state perspective down to the local perspective to make sure everybody's needs are met. And it's not just for 911, it's also for 988 now that we have 988 services deployed in the state, another critical public safety service being provided. Thank you.
Sheriff Bingham.
Good afternoon. Sheriff Bingham, Lake County Sheriff Coroner, and also OES Director for Lake County. Benefit of going third is pretty much by the time it gets to me, everything's covered. So, but from my perspective, just to capitalize on what Sheriff Kendall said, is that sometimes people forget the type of community that we live in. We're a very rural community. We're a very rugged community in different areas. And that causes a lot of communication problems within our communities, even within our own dispatch system and our radio systems. We have multiple repeaters, and there's still areas in the county where our radio systems don't work for my deputies, and that's true of cell phone systems. And so our goal within the OES branch of the sheriff's office in the county is to always have those redundant systems of notification and communication within the county.
Thank you. And well, with this question, it's to everyone, but let's start with Sheriff Bingham and then come back the other way. So you've talked about the importance of 911 and emergency response systems. Can you talk about the effectiveness of these programs and whether they depend on reliable end user communication services?
Well, the simple answer to that is yes. It absolutely requires the end user to be able to get that information and receive that information in whatever means that is, from boots on the grounds to landline to cell service to emails. It's all wrapped into one, and kind of goes back to my original statement of those redundant systems. We don't ever rely on one communication system. When we have an emergency, we have multiple backups and multiple layers of communications and notifications for our community.
Thank you. And just, I was remiss. I apologize. I thought that that Officer White was not available, and but he is here and he's participating virtually. So I want to introduce Andrew White, the Chief of Police for the City of Martinez, who is virtually on the screen. And I don't know, Officer White, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. Did you want to make a few statements about the work you do and how it relates with telecommunication services?
Sure. So I have just about going on 21 years as a police officer. I served as police chief in the city of Clear Lake, which is not too far north of you, and worked with both of the sheriffs that are on the stage now in multiple emergency response. I started out my career as a dispatcher, so I've had sort of a career-wide experience with telecommunications and interoperability and understanding the benefits of the limitations. I've served on the 911 advisory board for almost 4 years now, where we work through a lot of these issues, as well as with Mr. Troxel, in terms of making sure we have a strong system. I think it was mentioned about redundancies, which I'm sure we'll talk about more during the panel. So thank you.
Thank you. And Officer White, while you're speaking, do you want to add anything? I know it seems like an obvious question, but to talk a little bit about the effectiveness of emergency response systems and reliability of end user communication service?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely essential. I think when you look at all disaster response, having effective communication is key. And I think having overlapping methods of communication, I think something that we've all learned is as technology's improved and there are new ways to contact people, that systems do fail. And so having that redundancy is key. Having the ability to communicate, whether it's shelter in place instructions or instructions on evacuating and so forth, that it's key to be able to communicate to folks. As mentioned, I think, having started most of my career in the Bay Area and then working in Lake County for 4.5 years, I got a strong exposure to some of the many challenges that the sheriff's alluded to in serving rural areas. I would also say that I think one of our focuses when we look at this tends to be on disasters like fire, et cetera. But I think the three of us learned during the public safety power shutoffs some of the definite issues that are involved. When you have power go out for 24 hours up to multiple days long, that other systems that seemingly are reliable most of the time, like voice over IP or cell phone, suddenly shut down because they didn't have backups and they don't work the same way as copper landlines in the rural areas.
No, thank you. That's very good point. And again, wanted to go to Mr. Truxell and see if you had anything else you wanted to add about the need for and the effectiveness of end user communication service.
I think it's very important to point out all the different ways folks can get into the 911 network. We can do it through a voice call on a plain old telephone. We can do it on VoIP, voice over IP. We can do it with a wireless device, and we can also do it with text message. So it's not just the voice call. We now have the capability statewide for texting. The important part of the 911 ecosystem is when that call is made, your location is delivered. The location of the last known, whether it's the account information, the VoIP subscribers update that they put in the system, or the wireless device being triangulated throughout the wireless network, or in NextGen, it'll actually provide the device-based location. That is an important component. That's the starting point for the dispatcher to locate the caller. And if that 911 ecosystem's not available and you have to call through another means through a 10-digit number, you're not getting that. You may get caller ID, but it takes time to go through and work with the carrier to find a location or account information to locate the caller. And in a 911 call, time is not what we have.
Thank you. Sheriff Kendall, did you want to add anything? Okay, thank you. Mr. Truxell, question for you about next generation 911. Can you maybe briefly describe what next generation 911 is and what will change with implementation of next generation 911 and what steps remain before it can be fully implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about next generation 911 for years, since the advent of the wireless device. I think the first iPhone came out in about 2007. So about that time, the industry said, wait a minute, we need to adapt. What we call the legacy 911 network is based on 1970s, 1980s technology, and it's reliant on physical infrastructure to be able to distribute a 911 call. And I'll use Mendocino County as the example. If Mendocino County Dispatch gets a 911 call and they need to send it to Clear Lake, if there's not a connection through their local selective router to accomplish that, or a selective router to selective router connection to accomplish that, that transfer cannot happen. There's a physical limitation. In next generation 911, we eliminate that physical limitation, and we now allow transfers to go throughout the entire state. And when our border partners, Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona, and even Mexico, we're currently working with the bordering states in Mexico to create an interface in our systems so we can transfer calls back and forth. In theory, our folks up in the Mount Shasta area can get a 911 call and they can transfer it to San Diego across 911 with all of that rich data that would be available. So next generation 911 gives us a lot of enhanced features. It also allows for supplemental data. Best example there is telematics or OnStar, very, very popular service being offered through some automakers. So if you get into a crash, there's automation in the car to determine how fast you were going, how many seat belts were fastened. even a scale in the seat to estimate the weight of the passenger. And then what's the location of the car physically on or off the highway, and the condition. Is it on its side, upside down? All of that information is available. It goes through the OnStar dispatch center. They validate it and they can push it through the Next Gen 911 center, so we can get it and push it directly to his dispatch center. So when his dispatchers get it, they see this car is upside down in a ditch 30 feet off the roadway, and the ditch is 10 feet deep. There's 4 people in the car. Based on the accelerometer, the injuries are expected to be this. So now we're not reliant on that first responder to show up and go, this is bad. We now have advanced data that we can alert fire and medical so they can start the appropriate resources. That's the value of Next Gen. The other value is we now get the device-based location of our wireless device. State of California, we have just over 26 million 911 calls. 87% of those calls are coming from a wireless device. We have about 4% are coming from a plain old telephone, POTS line, and then about 6% are coming from a VoIP line. So again, the benefit of Next Gen in today's legacy world, the wireless device is seeking out towers to do a triangulation and get an area where the caller is. Next generation 911 will give us Uber-like accuracy. In an analogy that we were meeting with a congressional member about a month ago. The analogy my team used was, today, I can come out in this parking lot and order Uber Eats, and they'll deliver right to me within a 15-foot area or 15-meter area. As soon as my lunch gets here, I'll call 911, and is this Lake County here? Yes. Okay, I'll call 911, and his dispatcher will understand that I'm somewhere in this general area. Likely with a 95% accuracy rate that could be 50 meters or 150 meters, depending on the tower strength. So in this particular area, with this event center, the casino, the hotel, where do you start? So again, getting that device location is very critical for us. And then the state of California, we've started our next generation 911 deployment. We have the technology installed in all of our 911 centers, again, 447 throughout the state. We have network delivered to each of those centers. Currently, we have 23 PSAPs or dispatch centers cut over using Next Gen 911, but they're not 100% cut over. So the way the state's plan is we had to go carrier by carrier. Not all carriers are cut at the centers that are receiving those 911 calls. Because of the complexity and some of the challenges that we've had on our project, we've decided to set a pause. We're evaluating the current plan. We're meeting with those centers that have Next Gen 911 delivered to their PSAPs. We're getting what their experience is, and we're meeting with the vendors and then all of our stakeholder groups so we can develop what our go-forward plan is, how we can complete this deployment, and what's our best step forward. And we are committed to the deployment of Next Gen. It's critical that we get Next Generation 911. And another benefit that we have is if the Lake County dispatch team needs to evacuate, they only have one place that they can send their 911 calls today, again, based on limitation of a point-to-point circuit. Next Generation 911, we could diversify that workload across multiple centers, or we can send it completely out of this region. If it's a big enough event, we can take Lake County and we can push it to the city of Sacramento. Let this area serve what that emergency is and still get those calls answered. So again, advanced technologies offer a lot of great opportunity for us.
No, thank you. And is there any limitations or concerns related to Next Gen 911 regarding the end user consumer technology? That's not going to make a difference on.
So it won't make a difference. Next Gen has a D mark. The carrier will give us the 911 call. Anything on the carrier side of the network, Next Gen doesn't improve, doesn't change. The important thing is that the citizen or the caller has the opportunity to get dial tone and call 911.
Thank you. And would any of the other panelists like to add anything about Next Gen 911? No, Officer White? No, okay.
No, I think Mr. Troxel gave a good overview.
Okay, great. So this question is for everyone on the panel, and we'll start with Sheriff Kendall. How does the existence of copper infrastructure alongside cable, fiber, and wireless infrastructure delivering communication services affect emergency response?
Well, I think that that is probably the biggest question that we're going to face during this is, in my experience, and I've been through several pretty horrific experiences with wildfires, with floods, with things like that, as has Sheriff Bingham. There have been times where we have zero cell service, we have no connectivity, we have no power. During the 2017 wildfires, we had our copper lines, the poles had been burned and they were laying on the ground, but I was still able to make it to a fire department, pick up a landline, dial it, and connect with CAL FIRE. And we had nothing else at that time, with the exception of our police radios. But when we got to the northern areas of Redwood Valley, even those police radios were not working as well as what they should have, because we did have some damage that was done to our microwave repeater links. And so, as Sheriff Bingham brought up earlier, these layers, this redundancy that we have in place is very, very important for first responders from the beginning to the end of an event. And then it seems like the two things that have historically worked in Mendocino County, and I don't want to speak for Lake or any other county, is local radio, where almost all of us who live in these rural areas, I live in a very rural area myself where cells do not work. Local radio, I keep a radio in my shop that I can turn on, it runs on batteries. And the copper lines, which I still have at my home, because you just can't get any cell service at my house. And if we remove one of those layers, the devil's in the details on some of these things. And as Sheriff Bingham also brought up previously, it's not just that emergency during the wildfire, we know something is going on. It's the emergencies that occur that you don't think about. It's a fall off of a ladder. It's something happened to someone during a PSPS, and without the ability to make a phone call, contact 911, contact EMS or fire or the sheriff's office, people are going to suffer. And so that's a huge concern for me if we start taking things off the plate that have historically worked for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Truxell?
So I'd really like to emphasize something the sheriff just said. For 911, we don't care what technology you've used to dial. There's differences, there's nuances in the 911 call. From your wired line, that location is keyed in by the telephone company you're getting the dial tone from. So when you set your account, there's somebody in there who keys in, you live at 123 Main Street, that's your address, and that populates the 911 database. With a VoIP carrier, voice over IP, when you get that service installed, you're given a form, and the homeowner, account owner, fills out the form, they give it to the VoIP carrier sends it in, and it gets updated. If that VoIP customer decides to move, even just move apartments, they don't think about, I'm keeping my service, I'm moving 4 doors down to the 2-bedroom. Well, now that location's no good. It's up to the customer to update it. With a plain old telephone, when you move, you call the telephone company, they update that record. And with the wireless device, the location is based on where you're making the call. Again, traditional legacy 911, there's challenges. Next Gen will bring in advanced features for us. And then text to 911 is the same as a voice call. So in general, for 911, we don't care what you use until we have that incident that takes out power, that burns up fiber, disrupts a cell tower. Then the only thing that you're left with is the copper wire to be able to get that voice call in.
Thank you. Sheriff Bingham?
Yeah, just to kind of capitalize on what Sheriff Kendall said, not to belabor the point too much, but being a rural community, there's a lot of my community, again, where cell services don't work and they have copper landlines. And to use some of the numbers from Mr. Truxell, 80% of the 911 calls are cell phone, 6% are VoIP, if I'm correct on that. So that gives about 14% are landline. And on average, my dispatch center receives anywhere from 35,000 to 38,000 911 calls a year. And if 14% of those are from copper landline, that is a lot of the community that we are not able to receive 911 phone calls from if we don't have the copper lines.
And just for the record, it's 4% are the copper line?
Not 4%.
Yeah, we have some additional numbers in there for telematics and other types of calls that come in to make the total 100%. But yeah, 4%.
That's my Middletown math.
No, that's all right. That's all right. But again, based on your workload.
Based on the 911 calls, that's still a large amount of 911 calls that we would not be able to receive and respond to.
Mr. Truxell, is that, are those percentages statewide?
Yeah, that's the statewide aggregated number.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you know if those numbers are different for rural areas like Lake County or Mendocino County, if it would be a higher percentage of landlines?
I don't know. I don't know that we've ever gone through that exercise to map those out.
Okay, thank you. And then Chief White, did you?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that point, because I think anecdotally you would find that more than likely, I would suspect the percentages are a lot higher as you go to the rural areas. As you go to more urban, I think you'll see higher. And I think something that may come out of this is to do a little bit more data gathering on that to truly determine the impact as opposed to overall statewide. I would also say that, as I think we've all mentioned, is these things together provide redundancy. However, for those areas, when you talk about fiber, for example, as soon as you get outside of core urban areas, it's pretty few and far between that you can get access to fiber infrastructure. There's obviously cable infrastructure, which can deliver a voice through the voice over IP, as was mentioned. But I would tell you, in multiple emergency situations where you experience power loss, it always seems to be that it's the VoIP that goes out, followed closely behind on cellular. I believe there's been some rulemaking done to require better backup at cell sites, particularly for rural areas that are impacted. But I think when we look at, how do they work or how does their existence impact the effectiveness? Well, if you break it down, sort of the last resort communication method, aside from what was mentioned about like a one-way radio communication to the public, is the copper infrastructure, and suddenly is very, very important to those people that it impacts. I think we all recognize that technology is changing, and maybe as things improve with satellite communication and so forth, this will be less of an issue. But I would also say that in my experience, what I found is that when disaster type situations happen, that copper infrastructure that exists in that sort of local area tends to be more quickly brought back online and supported. For example, like one of the main carriers, when power went out, they immediately brought out generator stuff to support the core stuff. When we talked to the cable company, which delivered VoIP to a lot of customers, they said, well, we're not really prepared for something like this. So they just didn't have that infrastructure that the other entities have. The last thing I would mention is that when you look at fiber infrastructure and you also look at, cable, for example, a lot of those end up aggregating through a single point. Like, for example, in a rural county, there's only so many paths of fiber in and out. And if that gets taken out, it impacts everything. Whereas some of the copper technology can exist just isolated to an area.
Thank you. And then for the next question, we'll start with you, Chief White. How do services like mobile voice service and voice over internet protocol compare to traditional telephone service in enabling reliable emergency response? And are these technologies equally capable of geolocating callers? And I know you've addressed some of this in the prior question, so if
Yeah, I think in general, no, they're not equally capable, but it is getting better. I think they each provide certain benefits. For example, with landline, you know, when I started as a dispatcher, it wasn't uncommon. You might get an emergency situation where somebody had to run from outside back in their house to pick up the phone and call 911. Whereas now we're benefited with people have it with them. If a you know, emergency situation is like on the move, somebody's calling in, you know, a drunk driver, or they're, you know, following something or whatnot, they can stay on the phone, and the technology's gotten much, much better for locating them. And I think, as Mr. Troxel mentioned, it will continue to get better. But I would say they're not all equal, and I think they have their pros and cons. And you know, ultimately, I think as you get to more rural areas where there's less cell phone coverage or less towers and whatnot, the ability to locate folks is more difficult using the kind of intermediary technology like the triangulation, because there may not be that many towers to locate them with.
Thank you. Sheriff Bingham?
Yeah, like Chief Weiss said, and I can give some anecdotal evidence to that, is we have a lot of search and rescue calls in Lake County where we have cell phone communication with the person, but they're only able to hit one tower because of the ruralness of the community. And I'm sure it's the same for Mendocino County. So we can't triangulate their phone. We can't get a GPS fix on where their phone is at in the community because of the rural mountains or the valleys that they're in. They're only able to hit that one cell phone tower to get that text message or that phone call.
Thank you. Mr. Truxell?
I would say some very good points being made. And again, each of these technologies offer benefits. There's pros and cons to each of them. I would emphasize in the rural area, because of the lack of wireless infrastructure and because of the lack of redundant network to support VoIP, when you're using a plain old telephone, when that person calls 911, you know where they're at. You've got that house mapped. And if you're very rural, that has been an address point. If you don't have enough cell tower to be able to triangulate and locate that wireless device, or worst case, the fiber connection burns up and there's no redundant path for the VoIP carrier, the VoIP customer to be able to call, you're not going to know where they're at.
Sheriff Kendall?
Just simply speaking from my experience, we've had some of our smaller towns go to VoIP. They've had my in-laws, their phone was switched over to VoIP. They had some terrible issues with it, because although the technology is improving, it's just not bulletproof like the old copper wire. And then we've had other issues with cell towers, as Sheriff Bingham brought up. I had a fire on Dingman Ridge in Round Valley, and all of a sudden, all the cell phones quit working. And then as we investigated it, Round Valley in the 2020 census, I believe they said we had about 2,200 people living there. But from the appearances of things, it appeared about 4,000 people had tried to dial 911 at the same time. And the cell tower that was put up to serve whatever the population was at that moment, it wasn't even close to being able to handle it. And so we can get these data points from the census and things like that. But when I speak with a friend of mine who owns the grocery store and ask him how many people are living in Round Valley, and he says, based on cans of beans and steaks that he sells, well, it's about 7,500 to 9,000. But the census does not show that. When I speak with the folks who own the fuel station there, how many people live in Round Valley? And granted, this was in 2001, 2002, during the height of our illegal marijuana seasons. And they were saying 7,500 to 9,000 people live in this valley. So we can get the information from the census. We can get the information from tax rolls and things like that, but it's not an accurate number. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there elements of basic service besides reliable two-way voice communication, such as California Relay Service or Lifeline, that are necessary for public safety? And are there elements that are not necessary? And then maybe start with you, Sheriff Kendall.
I think there's elements that improve. But it's those layers. It's those layers that we need all the time. And we got to have redundancy and backup. Every time that I go out in the forest, it seems like I pop a tire. I bring a spare tire with me, but I also bring tire plugs. I also bring an air compressor because with my luck, that spare is going to be flat. And so all of these technologies that are moving along and they're coming up, Lifeline and various other things, hey, they're great, right up to the moment that they don't work. And it seems that we get more and more reliant on technology, but the broader that the technology is, or the more focused it is, the more failure points we seem to have. And so that's why kind of the old tested, tried and true, even though it's low tech, it just seems to work well for us.
Thank you. Mr. Trexel?
I would say, from our perspective, having equal access to 911, everybody should have that. To support the deaf and hard of hearing community. We have the older TDD, TTY technologies. We have the relay service available, and now we have text to 911 available. Those are critical services that really need to be supported. And as we look at next gen 911, we're going to be able to do what's called real-time text, which is it's a text message, but as the caller's typing, the dispatcher will see the keystroke and see the letters appear and the story develop. And the benefit there is you're getting real time, not somebody typing and then hitting send. They'll be able to develop that emergency story as it's being typed. I think those are very critical conversations that we ensure that everybody has access to 911.
Thank you. Sheriff Bingham?
I think they covered it, but just to go back to my original point when I started was it's just the redundancy. Just having multiple layers so that when we do have a failure, when we do have something that doesn't work, when cell phones don't work, when VoIP doesn't work, that we have those multiple layers of redundancy for that public safety.
Thank you. And Chief White?
I think they covered this one very well.
And just as a follow-up to this question, do you see any concerns with affordability issues as we're looking at different technologies as compared to potentially landline service as to access for everyone?
Yeah, I'll take that. Especially in Lake County, we have a large population of elderly people in Lake County. We have a large population of economically disadvantaged people in Lake County. So some of them do struggle with some of the modern technology and affording that technology. And so that is a struggle. And whereas the landline is sometimes not only the only option, but the most economically viable option for them.
So in our rural counties, we have a lot of Native American tribes also, and almost all of them are out of the way, hard to serve places. Round Valley, Point Arena, these are areas that are geographically hard to get to. But due to the topography, cell towers and things like that, they just haven't been there. Now the tribe in Round Valley is working with us and they're putting in their own cell towers, but almost all of the people who are living on the Round Valley tribe right now, and that's where I grew up, we have a lot of elders out there who don't understand technology. Number one, they can't afford it. Number two, they don't understand it. Everyone grew up with a telephone, and it's almost like when we were kids in school and someone would walk over and hit the fire alarm, we knew exactly what to do. But we've been preaching and pushing out 911 for so long now that even people who are, getting well into their twilight years, they know how to dial 911. They have that technology there. They understand it, and it's useful to them. It's so hard to get these services into the out-of-the-way areas and then have them be reliable and at a price that somebody can afford. It's like this trifecta of problems when we see trying to get the modern world into areas like Round Valley, Point Arena, We've got some real out of the way places, Westport, places like that that just don't lend themselves to technology, but the lines have been there for years.
Thank you. Chief White, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think just to add on to that too is that right now, in the current setup, that when you look at affordability and then also to just being able to get it right, is at least right now in I think most every area that has a carrier of last resort, you can get that service, right? And so when you look at these other technologies, like unless you have access to it, they tend to cost more money. But I think even beyond the cost is simply just the accessibility to it. And then also too, when looking at, how it can be restored back if it fails, obviously, again, a lot of different pros and cons between the technology, but I think equitable access to, be able to call 911, obviously, but then also to just basic communication, I think is something that needs to be kept at the forefront of any, future resolutions or proposals that move this forward.
Thank you, Chief White. And then Mr. Trexel, did you want to add anything?
I would just add, I think to emphasize what these gentlemen have said is there may be people in our society who don't need a full VoIP package. They don't need Wi-Fi. All they need is dial tone, just a basic telephone. And I think as a society, we need to make sure that that service is available for those people who wish to live like that.
Thank you. So as we're moving through this rulemaking and evaluating what potential changes we may need to make to COLR obligations, a question for all of you. If the commission does determine that some areas may not require a designated COLR status obligation, how can the commission minimize potential impacts to public safety? And how can the commission support public safety agencies during and after such a transition? We can start with you, Sheriff.
Well, that is kind of the burning question of why we're here, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. So I think that is the $1 million question. If these services go away, what will be there? What will be there? Now, we have things like Starlink and these satellite things, but they are very pricey. And I know that a lot of people will not be able to afford them. We have the other issue for me is we've seen coverage maps over the years from various telecommunications companies and whatnot. And although they look good when I look at them, a lot of them make me laugh because they will have full coverage in places where I've been standing just 2 days prior, unable to make any phone calls. And so if this is actually going to happen, let's make sure that there's boots on the ground out there to say whether or not, whatever this comes in, whether it will work. Because if we're just going to do a wide sweeping, well, we got a map here and it says, by golly, you can get cell service on Blue Nose Ridge outside of Covelo. That's not going to work because you can't get cell service there. The other thing that we have to think about is the landscape of our counties has dramatically changed in the last 50 years. It just has. I was a child in the 1970s where we had large ranches and huge expanses of land. We had the back to the land movement that occurred, and these ranches were being broken up and subdivided into 40, 60 acre pieces. And what used to be one person in one section of land, 640 acres, that was roughly what we had in Mendocino County. Now we have multiple people in sections of land. And that copper line has been serving almost all of them for 50 years. How do you put that genie back into the bottle? That's the question. And if we're going to try to do it, we can't do it on, here's a map that says it's going to work. It's got to be boots on the ground and actually go test it.
Thank you. Mr. Trex, or Sheriff Bingham, did you want to go ahead, Sheriff?
I think Sheriff Kendall had it right. And just to add on to that, I think, especially in Lake County, just knowing the geography of Lake County, I think the investment in the infrastructure to cover the areas that are currently covered by copper line would far exceed what the current cost is for those copper lines. Because, Sheriff Kendall was talking and I just am remembering the old, I believe it was a T-Mobile commercial where the guy was walking around with the cell phone. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? That's what it would take to build that cell phone infrastructure or VoIP infrastructure in Lake County to reach those areas that are currently serviced by those copper lines. It would take somebody like that and a lot of time, a lot of investment, and a huge amount of capital to cover those areas that I think is not worth the expense compared to what the current cost for copper lines are.
Thank you. And then Chief White?
Yes, thank you. I think that the commission should keep it first and foremost as those individuals that currently are benefiting from the COLR who could potentially be impacted. In other words, the connections that already exist, that those are thought about first and foremost. I think that something that could help mitigate the impact of public safety is prioritizing. There may be areas of the state where it makes sense to look at this because there may be a strong overlay of other alternative technologies. So maybe that's an approach as you look to conduct the rulemaking. I think that we need to make sure that whatever is adopted is at least equal to or better than the existing service, recognizing that there's pros and cons of other technology. I also think that quality of service requirements, and I don't understand all the intricacies of the rulemaking or what authorities are there. But I think we found out, particularly through the last decade, we mentioned about power outage impacts to cell towers and how it can adversely impact rural areas or disproportionately impact them because of fewer towers covering a much broader area and providing, I'd argue in some way, a more critical service because it may be the only option. So as we look at all these things that we consider that, I think being flexible in the timelines, like I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. And I think you could see a drastic negative impact to public safety, if just suddenly tomorrow it's decided that this isn't there. I think it needs to be over time. I think Sheriff Kendall mentioned about the coverage maps. I've seen time and time again where maps that say, oh, this thing is here and it'll work, that it may or may not actually work. So that we carefully consider, when we decide if the decision is made to do this, that we know there is some other alternative. And then last but not least, I think is just, we talked about the impact to, areas that are economically disadvantaged, that there's some measure of equitable access to the extent that the commission could do that in adjusting this. I also think too that, maybe through this process with a lot of different telecommunication carriers involved, that everybody's sort of coming together. Maybe there's some ideas that we haven't thought about. And so I think to help public safety is just keep within the conversation. You have the representative, in charge of the 911 office. His communication through any of this will really be key so that we can mitigate and understand, what's the situation today. And if it changes tomorrow to something else, what can we count on working or not working based upon the new rulemaking?
Thank you, Chief White. And then Mr. Trexel?
Thank you. I really think these gentlemen gave a lot of real life examples of why this conversation is important. And Chief White said something that kind of resonated to an example that you gave. Just because you have wireless connectivity in an area does not mean it's the best service. In your example, you have a lost hiker who dials 911, can't get location because they only hit one tower. The system worked. For somebody, they checked the box. I dialed, I got somebody on the other line. It worked. It didn't work right. To work right, you need multiple towers so you can triangulate. Or when NextGen is deployed in that region, you need to validate that one tower has signal strength to deliver the data packet for that location. Then I think it could be assessed that it's a valid technology. But just because you make a voice call doesn't mean it's working right.
Thank you. And I wanted to see if Commissioner Reynolds had any questions.
No further questions from me, but I want to thank our public safety panelists. It's really been very informative. Thank you all.
I want to thank all of you for being here on the panel and just I think wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to add that wasn't covered by the questions before we close the panel.
That's how the seasoned sheriff works. Let the new guy go first, right? I don't know. I'll just wrap up by saying that I think that technology is great, and by no means everybody thinks that I'm opposed to VoIP or cell or anything like that. I'm not. I understand that there's a lot of benefits behind it. I think Sheriff Kendall said it, and maybe I'm reiterating. I just don't think it's there yet to turn our backs on the old reliable system. That system's been around since, I don't know, Graham Bell, and it works. So I don't think we're there yet. I think we're getting there. I just don't think we're there yet.
Luke, I really appreciate the fact that you call me the seasoned sheriff instead of that old gray-haired guy at the end. I'm not opposed in the least to the technology advances that are going on right now. I think that it's great. I think that someday we're going to come up with something that will serve these rural areas. However, I want to make sure that we ready, aim, fire, and not ready, fire, aim on this, because we will have lives in the balance. We've seen it before. I thought that Lake County had problems with fires until I became the sheriff of Mendocino County. And some of our areas are so taxed at times that without those multiple layers of communication, we just can't get through this. Also, on top of that, I have been to so many public meetings over cell towers and things, and there are some communities who jump up and down and say, yes, please, we want a cell tower. There are some communities you would think that we were going to, drop an airstrike on the Vatican because somebody wants to put up a cell tower. There are a lot of very passionate people on both sides of that equation, and sometimes we always have to listen to the voices, but sometimes it creates a very dysfunctional meeting. And I know that in order to get a lot of these things done, we're going to have to step on some toes, but there are times when we just aren't willing to. And when I say we, I mean, the Board of Supervisors, the folks who are, basically getting their backsides handed to them in these meetings because people don't want them in the backyard. That's something that we also have to take into account. But I know that we're kind of in some fledgling markets right now. I just love to see that shake out first so that we can say, we're going to do this right the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Truxell?
I really agree with what the two sheriffs have said. I think we're at a point where we need technological advancement, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have to have a life preserver in place.
Yes.
If we're going to get on the Titanic, we need to make sure that we've got the appropriate life preserver. I think that's the best analogy that I can come up with. And I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate these gentlemen sharing their impacts from their areas.
Thank you. And Chief White?
Yeah, I think that, hearing what everybody said is that, we have to be very thoughtful through this process, which I know the commission's gathered a lot of information and doing these outreach sessions. So thank you for doing that. And I think, there's a lot of carriers involved too that, we represent one point of input. And so hopefully they take all that. I think there's incredibly smart people involved in this on the technological and business side. So hopefully they take these issues and work through it. And I do understand that there's, certain implications. There's areas where literally there's people that don't live, but they provide, they have to be required to provide service. And maybe that's an area that can be tackled first. But there's definitely a lot of implications. So I look forward to seeing the continued coalescing of all the feedback and then determining what's the best to ultimately ensure that, people can reach emergency services wherever it is that they live and regardless of their economic status.
So I again want to thank all of you for being here today and providing your input. Safety is something that's really top of mind for us, and we need your input to be able to make sure that we're making the right decision. So thank you for being here today, and appreciate it.
And we will be turning next to the county supervisors. So if we can have our panelists to the front. Thank you all for joining us. Good afternoon. I'd like to kick off by giving each of you a chance to briefly introduce yourselves and say a few things about your county in terms of its demographics, the location of your constituents, and some of the challenges that they face regarding access to telephone service, wireless, or broadband. So why don't we start off with Supervisor Griffiths?
Thank you. My name is Jeff Griffiths. I'm a Inyo County Supervisor, District 2. I represent the city of Bishop. I'm also the president of the California State Association of Counties. And Inyo County is 10,000 square miles, 19,000 human beings. We have more cows than we do people. And those folks are spread across an incredibly diverse geographical area. We are the county that is home to Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the lower 48, and Death Valley. And we have two very large mountain ranges, vast stretches of desert, and little pockets of people that are spread out throughout that beautiful landscape. And it becomes incredibly challenging to communicate with these folks and to get broadband and cell service to all of those communities has proven incredibly challenging, even though we're making great strides in that area. But telephone service is really important and a lifeline to huge segments of my community.
Thank you. Supervisor Hook?
Thank you, commissioners. So I'm Sue Hook, and I'm from Nevada County. I'm in a rural community as well. We are in a community of about 100,000 folks that live there, but in very different areas. It's interesting. We have 3 cities in our county and a large portion of Forest Service land and BLM land. And then of course we have 3 state parks in our area. So, and some rivers that traverse from one side to the other. So we do find this a challenge as we go through. We have folks that have lived in this area over 100 years, and we have some that have just moved there from the city over time, especially as we went through COVID, and they're experiencing a different reality from what you have in the city versus a rural community. So we struggle with this just a little bit. And as you know, I'm pretty boisterous about it in our community. Especially we have a very elderly community for the most part, which makes it a challenge. And we also have some of the underserved in our area that make it a challenge too. So we look at this as a need, and we look at this as something that they deserve as well. Some of those folks, I mean, for me, myself, we've had a phone over 60 years in our home, right? So it's a privilege as well, right? But so that's what we're going to continue to look at. And how do we look at how we grow? Technology's got to come, and we understand that, but how do we keep our people protected in the meantime, especially when we talk about safety?
Supervisor Pisca.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jessica Paiska, and welcome to Lake County. You heard a lot about our county from our sheriff, and I think earlier today from one of our past supervisors. Lake County, we have about 68,000 people. We have 2 small cities. My entire district is unincorporated. Over the past 10 years, almost 70% of our county has burned. We experience floods. and we experience quite a lot of power outages. We've had many impactful winter storms. So it's a year-round. We've got emergencies year-round, and and our constituents, we do not have broad coverage for cellular service or broadband. And our constituents have to understand that they need to be able to rely on a multiple different platforms. So what's really lacking right now is the redundancy. We have very few cell towers, as our sheriff mentioned. So in the winter storms, one cell tower goes out, most of my constituents are in the dark. That happens in the summer too, when we have outages where that cell tower, for whatever reason, the power's out and the generator is out of fuel. It's happened during when my constituents were in an advisory evacuation during an active wildfire. So this is the situation that my constituents live with every day. So I've been a part of these workshops before. I've given a lot of stories before in the past. I think we'll get to some of that today too. But I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with you and talk to you and tell the stories of rural counties.
And thank you for being with us, and Supervisor Mueller.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm from San Mateo County, so it's not thought of as a rural county. We have over 750,000 residents. But the district that I represent in San Mateo County is about 340 square miles, including all the unincorporated areas, from the Santa Cruz Mountains all the way to Pacifica and that really wildland area. And so when you look at that, in Pescadero, for example, we have approximately 400 people. Up in the La Honda area, we have about 1,000 people. And throughout wide pockets of that southern coastal region, we don't have any cell service. And certainly intermittent cell service. Our grid on the San Mateo County coast, our electrical grid on the San Mateo County coast is pretty terrible. And when the windstorms come through, or any storms come through, we lose it. In some areas, we've lost it for weeks at a time. And so, especially in southern San Mateo County, the outages can last for a very long time. And so we've seen these impacts happen. And we also have relied on our landline service as recently as the CZU fires to do reverse 911 phone calls when there was no other way to reach people. So the Kohler is incredibly important. But I also would say, as someone from who is from considered an urban county, it's important in our urban areas too. And we heard that last year from our residents who were suffering from access and functional needs issues, who have maintained those landline services because they are worried about when that power goes out, will they have access to be able to reach out and get help? And so it's a pleasure to join you all here today and talk about those things.
I'll stick with you, Supervisor, and ask you to respond first to my next question. You've already touched on it, I think, but could you go further on really to what extent do you feel like your residents still rely on basic phone service?
Yeah, so they do, but increasingly it's getting difficult because even though that basic service obligation is there, for a lot of them, the price of it's going up. And so I have residents who are reaching out saying, hey, I have this, but it's starting to become prohibitively expensive to have it. And that is in itself a problem, especially in those areas where the grid is so terrible and where the cell service is so intermittent. And so that's a challenge that we face. But we definitely hear from residents who, even and certainly in those areas where there is no cell service, have it. But in those areas where there's cell service but it's just really bad, they have it. And then for folks who have those chronic healthcare needs where there is cell service, they are still keeping it and paying that premium so that they know that they're able to reach out for help.
Supervisor Pyska?
It is quite common for people to have no cell service at their homes here. We'll never change topography. As I said, the cell coverage here is very spotty, but I have constituents who are medically fragile who only have a landline. Actually, I had a couple reach out to me in the last few weeks. There's damage to their landline. I think it happened through the storms. So there's water damage. I don't know the extent of it. They reached out to me, left me a voicemail. I cannot get back to them because they do not have cell service at their home. And I don't think that they understand how to set up their voicemail either, because when I try and reach them on their cell phone, I can't leave them a message. I don't know how they are. And they do rely on medical devices. They live in a very populated area. They are not living out in a very rural area. They're living in a dense community. So, these are the people that I'm really, really concerned about. This is not an unusual story. I got another message from a constituent this morning. She lives in an area where, again, she doesn't have cell service. She has to go all the way into town to use her cell phone. That is an area that floods almost regularly whenever we have an atmospheric river. So she has to be able to get alerts to leave her home so that she's safe when the rivers flood. So this is something that's happened multiple times over this winter. So that landline is her landline to safety.
Supervisor Hook.
Well, I could echo most of those comments so far, but it is true. And even in our area, I have a gated community in my district, and even there's pockets where folks cannot get service, and there is an older population in there. I have a gal, she moved there. There had been a phone there that she was not allowed to have her phone reconnected, and that's been a challenge. Same thing, she has to drive out to get that. And I think even though we look at this numbers, there's well over 5,000, almost 6,000 people in Nevada County still on POTS lines, and a lot of them have both. I think people do enjoy that. We all are learning the new technology and how to use that, but it's not dependable like the POTS line, and that's been the challenge. I have folks that live with medical equipment that hasn't met the technology to do cell or be able to reach the broadband information from that. So that's very challenging. I get to live some of this, so it's kind of fun when I talk to my constituents because I get to live it myself. My husband has a chip. His medical device only runs through the POTS line. My mom had a war one. I had to drive to town for it to read her meter. And so I'm listening to my constituents tell this, but I get to live it real time. I live with my cell phone. I have to have that at work, right? But it's sketchy at best, and I live probably less than a mile from a cell tower. But with our topography where we live, it makes it challenging for the folks that live there. I think everybody wants new technology. We want broadband, we want all those things, but then we want reliability and the safety that goes behind this. Fires. We live in a fire area as well, across the river. With the last fire that we had, I had the folks living over by North San Juan, it's called, right? They felt locked out because there was no way to communicate. So I think there's stories that go along with this. I loved what the sheriff's all had to say. I think safety is the huge component of this. And how do we do this? Make the transference where there's something absolutely reliable. I always love to tell the story. You guys, we had that great, we were doing the call-ins and having that little survey going on, right? And AT&T went down through the whole state. And you guys told everybody to call on your landline. And I always find that, so I tell that story a lot because it's kind of crazy, because you know why? It was the most reliable.
Supervisor Griffiths.
Thank you. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. It was well said, but yeah, counties, we don't have the access to the data, so I don't know the exact percentage of folks, but anecdotally within our more quote unquote well-served areas, we have the same elderly and medically fragile people and people that just want that reliability, that guarantee that you just pick up the phone and you have that communication, and then we have communities that have such long distances to cover in order to get broadband fiber internet there, or the topography makes it impossible, but not profitable to provide cellular service, that their only access is through copper phone lines. And one good example that I like to bring is in Death Valley in the national park. They use the copper landlines, and then if they need to use broadband internet, they drive to Nevada to a place like that's the closest place that they can get it. And so telephone communication is still critical in huge swaths of my county.
So we're considering the nature of our carrier of last resort rules and the elements of our basic service. And I'm curious if any of you have thoughts about recommendations for potential changes to the nature of basic service. And just for reference, basic service today includes voice grade communications. It includes access to 911. It includes Lifeline for eligible participants. Why don't we start at the far end, Commissioner or Supervisor Griffiths?
Well, if you want to include reliable, affordable broadband internet into basic telephone service, we would appreciate that. But I'm pretty sure that's not on the table today. But 211, and I think some of my colleagues may want to talk about this some more, but 211 is something that we are increasingly relying and building out as an information sharing network within our county. And I know statewide it's become a priority, and access to 211 I think would be a good way to get information out to the public and relieve some of the pressure on 911 during emergencies.
Yeah, I would echo that. Our 211 system has just become invaluable with the emergencies that we've had to go through. And, we've trained people to use 911 for so long, but 211 is really relieving that dependency for, if it's just like, where is the smoke coming from? We get those 911 calls. So I think that helps with our first responders as well. And then as far as that, I just keep looking at this. I just want to say, we talk about no one left behind. So the services that we have to have are so that none of our folks are left behind. I think that's really important. I don't want to go walk around and say, can you hear me now? I think that is a challenge. So that basic service is just entirely real important. And if we could add the 211, I think that would be very significant.
So I view this as more than basic service. I view this as essential service. And 211 is what we're building up for resources that a lot of these populations need. They need to understand the resources that are available to them so that they're not using 911 for reasons it's not intended. We also have 998 that we need to be able to include with this essential service.
I'm not sure that in terms of the actual service component, I have anything to add. The thing that comes to mind most is the interplay and reliability. So the thing that whenever we have conversations like this, the thing I think most often is that the difficulty in the conversation is that all of these services are so dependent on the power grid, and there needs to be, it's just a dependency. And so you can't have that conversation absence the discussion of the grid. That's why we tumble back to, for the landlines, why they're so useful is because they're so far away from an outage that copper wire is set forth. And so when you're looking at basic service, I think you need to put into a basic level of what is the reliability of that service.
Asking for each of your opinions, do you think that carrier of last resort should provide wireless as a basic service alternative broadband? Why don't we start with Supervisor Mueller?
So as I understand the technology now, I don't think it's a viable alternative yet. I think that it really comes again because of that dependency. I think you really need to, I think it's going to need to be proven out that it can withstand those power outages and events, those those natural hazard events for the length of time necessary to be equal to current service or better. If they can prove that out, then it's something, but I don't think that it's, from what I understand now, that hasn't been proven out. So I actually think the Kohler analysis that you guys have gone through has been fair on that point.
Yeah, my points are very similar. The service quality and the reliability has to be guaranteed at this level or better. As far as maps and service areas, they have to be ground truthed. We can all look at maps and know from our communities that coverage is not being, those people on the ground are not appreciating those coverages. Like, we know that is a truth.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're just not there yet. I think that even in Nevada County, we would see a lot more users if they hadn't lost their lines through being sold VoIP, right? So that was a big one. You'll still have your phone, you'll still pick it up, but when the power goes off, you don't. So I think actually you'd see an escalated amount of folks still using the copper lines if it was available still. So I just think we're just not there yet. I think in rural, we're just going to struggle with our topography and the amount of time. And yet we've provided this service over the years to these folks. And how now do you take it back? So I think we'll get there someday. I mean, look where we've come so far, but I do think it's out in the future.
I agree with all of my colleagues on this. I think if it were wired broadband, then it could be part of the conversation. But even with that, the problem with the replacement of carrier last resort is that there's a guarantee right now that service must be provided. And there are regions of my county, and I'm sure everyone else's counties, that we know it's not going to be profitable to be providing that service. So if there was a world where that carrier of last resort obligation was replaced with another service, if that guarantee doesn't come with it, then what happens when that company decides that this isn't a profitable region to be in and then leaves, and then you leave the community without any communication capabilities whatsoever?
Can I follow up on that? And that's the profitability after the infrastructure has been developed. And I was told in our last workshop by the industry that it will never be profitable to invest in that infrastructure in this county. So I can't imagine that things have changed in the last year and a half. So if the industry views this as unprofitable, then they will never view it as an essential service, and that infrastructure will never be developed in rural places like this.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
Could you each please share your perspectives on whether the existing carrier of last resort obligation succeeds in its goals of protecting public safety and ensuring universal service in your communities? And let's start with Supervisor Griffiths, please.
Yeah, so I think the short answer to that is yes. With the caveat being that we have seen slippage in maintenance and investment into the existing system. And so we've noticed the system becoming more fragile. And then when there is a weather-related event, a flood or winds or whatever it is that cause a disruption, an outage in that system, that it's difficult to know whose responsibility it is, who to be held accountable for bringing that system back online in a timely manner. Is 3 weeks timely? Is 6 weeks timely? Because in some of our regions, it's been challenging to find who to contact to try to get that process rolling and to keep it going. And we've had communities that were without that lifeline service for a long period of time.
Okay, so I would just echo that, but I think it's not even just, I think it can even be a neighborhood that's left without, right? And I think that's a challenge. Like, let's talk about Grass Valley for just example. There used to be 80 employees there. And now we're down to 2 troubleshooters and 10 folks, right? And so now you have emergency medical things. I don't want my folks will call and they'll be told 3 weeks wait. That's just not appropriate, right? And so those are the things where I think we're just lacking. It's been a lack of maintenance of infrastructure for years. And we know that rural counties are not going to be the first one to get hooked up to the modernization. So would I say they're just succeeding in this? Personally, I think we've gone backwards. So I think that there's still work to be done, and we're going to go back to that. No one left behind. That's they say we're not going to leave anybody behind, but they're already leaving people behind in rural counties.
Yeah, I'm going to continue with this fragility of the system. So not this winter, thankfully, but the last several winters with the low-level snowstorms and the wind events, trees just crippled the systems. But we knew that PG&E was going to be out doing restoration within a matter of hours, and that we knew that our constituents would have their power back on within a day or so, or sometimes a week when it was really bad, when hundreds of trees came down. But we also know that telecoms are the last to arrive, and sometimes it's weeks. It's usually weeks. They're very difficult to get a hold of, and they don't show up. And again, these are essential services. So when those folks are left in a snowstorm without power and without broadband and without their landline, the cell towers are also down, by the way. Like, they're literally in the dark. And we know that these are the people that are going to come last to make those repairs.
Thank you. So the one thing I'd say is I'm not sure if it's call or last resort or where this fits in, but there's a lot of anecdotal information that comes back that the interaction with the consumer isn't always totally informed. So in areas where people have a choice, I have seniors who think they're on landline, but they're actually on VoIP. I also have circumstances where people just are seeing their price for landline go up so much that they're having to make a choice on cost that is not, it doesn't equate with their trying to protect for their safety in that circumstance and reliability. So those are the things in our area that really are affecting people pretty significantly.
Both power outages and disaster recovery has definitely been a theme I've heard from all of you. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about communications resilience and backup power and the effect that communications with backup power has on your constituents. We can start with Supervisor Mueller, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's backup power has been essential. When we went through the storms in 2023, we saw areas go without power for long, and they would come back on and be out again. And in those areas, we really understood the benefit of the landlines going through that. And even if we could get portable cell towers into an area, it was really difficult for people to be able to drive where that cell tower was. Roads were, so it's just absolutely, and there are just certain areas. And what's also important is in those regions of our county that have this problem, we're 25 minutes from Palo Alto, 30 minutes from Palo Alto. If everything breaks right, there are no plans to put in cell towers in those areas. So I mean, the difficulty that you have, I really sympathize with, because I can't get the service, that close to the heart of Silicon Valley. So, it's just absolutely essential that the power grid is a complete dependency in this issue.
Yeah, the winter storms are one thing. We've had a lot of PSPSs over the years, but the PSPSs, at least in our county, are becoming less regular. the fast trip outages are more regular. And that is very difficult to prepare for. And we have no idea the duration of an event. And sometimes they sort of overlap into new events. And I have schools on these circuits. I have elementary schools on these circuits. So if the power is out and there's no backup generation with the utilities, then the kids are either at school and can't be contacted by their parents, or we have to shut school down and the kids go without school for the day.
So in Nevada County, we've been talking about our topography and we're in that rural. And then I have so many folks that they can't even afford extra backup power resources, especially when you're out for lasting days. I mean, we had a couple of times been out 10 days, 14 days. So that becomes a challenge. That was a wake up call when everybody bought the propane generators, and it was costing them that they would empty a tank in a week, a 250-gallon tank. So that was a real reality check for folks that live in a rural area as well. So people do try to have that kind of ability to have backup that's for the necessities, water, basically, right? So, and it doesn't necessarily work because if your towers are out, it really doesn't matter if you have backup power. So there's some challenges. Rural is just very, we just struggle and we just need to be heard. So I appreciate you all listening to this today. I think there's been a lot of great conversation. I think there'll be more to come.
Yeah, I guess since we're telling disaster stories, I'll tell you a unique one. We had a flash flood in Death Valley that took out the power lines, and in the middle of summer. And when the power goes out in Death Valley in the summer, you have to evacuate everybody because it's so hot. You can't, like, literally, you'll die if you're there without air conditioning. And the landline telephones were still working, and those were essential in communicating with folks.
As maybe a kind of follow-up on the same theme, I imagine that many of your regions often have a coincidence of power outages and disasters that potentially present real threats to people if they are away from home or potentially at home. And I wonder if you could just talk about perhaps the viability of customers in those situations being able to travel to a location where they can get a cell signal, and kind of the experience that your constituents might have with a coincident disaster with risks to health and safety and a power outage.
Yeah, when the power goes out, that is affecting a cell phone tower that does not have backup power, the travel distances in my community are measured in hours, not minutes, to get to another place with cell phone coverage.
Yeah, and I'd say evacuation routes, especially for us, that they become jam-packed depending on the issue. For example, when we had the Jones fire was one that we had and affected until the winds changed. But so one whole side of the river, they were kind of stuck and there was not communication. We had to figure out how to get there and put signs up so people could drive to see what the evacuation orders were. We had extra folks of first responders had to be there. So I think that's challenging. I mean, you'd have to figure out where the emergency is. It's never going to be the same. And they're going to be packed depending on where the evacuation is going. So I'm not really sure that you can give an exact time of what it takes, because every emergency is very different.
So the last time I spoke at one of these workshops, the night before I had an emergency where I was in South Lake County at a winery, a little bit of a remote location. They do have a landline. There's no cell service. And there was a high school cross country meet, and there was 5 schools. And one of the schools was from Lake County. The other 4 schools were from out of county. and a fire broke out near the entrance road to this winery. And it was in the same place that the Clayton fire had broken out, which was, I think it was 2016, which burned most of this town of Lower Lake. So we could see the smoke column. We could not get the alerts. So all the power was shut off for all of South County. I could not call my supervisor colleague who was on the road trying to reach the fire chief because the cell towers had gone down too. So here we are with children or teenagers out on a course. We don't know if we're in an evacuation zone. We have no information on the fire, which direction it's going, if we need to evacuate. So you can imagine, like, this is a pretty good example of rural life in fire season and how you have to have layers of redundancy. Now, eventually, each and everybody's cell phone went off with the emergency alert. However, we did not have enough bandwidth to download any of the emergency maps to know if we were in an evacuation zone or to receive any of the information that was being put out by OES.
So yeah, I mean, we really rely on the reverse 911 we did during the ZZU fires of being able to reach out to people and tell them it was coming. That's different than, I mean, you can't ask people to go and camp out at where the portable cell phone tower is. During those storms, I was on the phone with FEMA begging for a portable cell tower to come down, and because of there was just not enough of them to go around. And then even more importantly, though, for folks with access and functional needs, they're not able to leave and go to that place and wait at the cell tower to know when that's coming. So I know that in the best of circumstances, if it's that dire, you would want the folks to evacuate beforehand, but that's not always possible in the natural hazard event. So it's just, don't get me wrong, to have the portable cell towers come in are helpful, but it's just an added layer of protection and not a replacement.
I want to check with Commissioner Hauk and see if she has any questions that she'd like to ask the panel.
So a lot of you talked about maintenance at certain points, even for the landlines. How reliable are the landline services, or as we're looking at, what should be required for Kohler responsibilities? Are there any things that that you think would be particularly helpful for us to understand as we're kind of trying to assess what the service is and where the technologies overlap with access and safety?
So when I drive around and see fallen trees being held up by telecom lines, I have a lot of concerns. And those trees have been sitting there for months and months and months, which tells me that no one is driving and checking the lines. There has to be some sort of routine maintenance, routine vegetation work to just check and make sure that they're working. I mean, that seems to be pretty simple, but it's just not happening. And these are on our main artillery roads.
So I think there's two parts, like I mentioned before. There's the ongoing investment and upgrades to the system, and then there's the timely repair after an outage. And I could have staff collate better examples, my IT and my EOS staff. But when what was it, when Frontier went to Verizon during that bankruptcy proceeding, like we were told that there would be upgrades to the copper system, you know, maintenance, bringing it up to speed, and however long ago that was, we never saw that in our area, and we've just seen a continual sort of decline and decay in the system that increases its fragility, and it appears to be breaking more often, and it appears to take longer to bring it back online after it's broken.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Both, I mean, when you drive around, you see things that are obvious they need to be fixed. Or you have a neighborhood that's continuously out for long periods of time. But I'm trying to be not all the ways negative, but you know, if you're out your line all the time, finally you get fed up and you say, okay, well, I'll just get rid of my phone and have to deal with it. But then they're dealing with not having any kind of way to communicate because cell phones don't work. I work, and I don't have a cell phone, like I told you. And so I have neighbors that live abound in a little area down there, and it's a constant. The cable probably needs to be fixed or more mended than what it does, because every time it rains, it quits, or squirrel gets in the box. I mean, those are all the things that come with landlines. We get that. There's a lot of work to it. And in another token, though, I just want to shout out to AT&T specifically, is what I have where I live. When I call, I want to say I appreciate them because they will make some things happen. But you know what? I shouldn't be the one having to call. Should be able to call and not get the runaround from the folks on the telephone. So, but I do want to say, I do appreciate the fact that when I have had some urgent issues, I had a guy medical, I said, I'm going to send you the picture of his foot. His bone is hanging out of he's had a thing. I'm going to send you the picture and tell me you can't come for 3 weeks. But they fixed it like within 2 days. So it can happen, and they do that. And I just want to say thank you for that, because I've had some situations that have been dire, and they have been great. So on that note, I don't want to be all negative, but
With that, I think we can close our panel of the county supervisors. I want to offer my appreciation to all of you for joining us today, and offer my particular appreciation for the fact that some of you have had to travel quite far from your county. So thank you for making the journey to be with us today. I really appreciate the input and perspective you've provided about the experience of your constituents with communication services. Thank you all.
thank you.
Can I add one closing remark to go to the positive side? It sounds like we're not just complaining all of the time. You know, I got rid of my landline a decade ago. I live in town, and you know, it's worked out really great. And you know, and I think that there will be a time when copper line goes the way of, you know, old technologies. I think the critical thing for my constituents is that there is a reliable, guaranteed replacement that provides that same lifeline service. And I see a future, and maybe not that far away, where that's possible. But you know, there's still a lot of steps to go to get to that.
Yeah, no, that was well said, because I do think we're there. I do still have my landline. I'm not giving it away. But I agree with you. I mean, when we look where we've come with technology over the last 10 years, even, it's extremely amazing. I mean, I had one of those bag phones originally, so I've been with PacBell and AT&T for all these times. And yeah, the change has been challenging for people that are technically challenged. But I do see a future, and I do see that good things are going to happen, but I do see it's going to see it in an urban area before we're going to see it in rural. And we just don't want to be those folks left behind. We got to take care of them. And I don't want to hear, well, you live rural, that's your choice. Well, we have for 100 years, and you provided the lines, and we shouldn't have to go without. So, but thank you very much for hosting this, and thanks the tribe for having us here today.
So I lost my home in the 2015 Valley Fire and rebuilt it without anything for landlines. So I haven't had a landline in 10 years. I want to get to that point where our rural constituents have safe, reliable, and adequate and I'm going to add redundant coverage. That's where we need to be. It's going to be really expensive with the means that are available right now. And I think it's out of reach right now. I'm just hoping that we're going to get to that day when there is technology that's available that makes sense for our types of communities, that we enjoy living in, out in nature and in the rural areas. And we do deserve to have the essential services that everyone across the state has.
Well, I want to thank the panel and thank you all for having me. The only other word that I think we haven't talked about that I don't want to leave the panel from saying is the word obligatory. And I think that it's really important to say, because in the context that someday we will move to, we're going to put it more on the technology's gotten there and the market's going to have it. The question is how will the obligatory backstop work to make sure that the public is protected? And I think that's a tough one for you all to figure out. But that is in the things that in the discussions that I've seen had around this issue, that word obligatory cannot be lost, because it really is that last resort component of this that keeps the public safe.
I also wanted to thank you for taking the time, because as Commissioner Reynolds noted, you had to travel a long way to be here. This is really important to the commission. I think it's important to you and your constituents. And so I wanted to thank you for taking the time to be here.
So we are approaching the end. I believe that both Commissioner Houck and I will have some brief closing remarks, but I understand before that there's a member of the public who has come to join us and wishes to make a comment. And I would invite that person to come join us up front and use one of our microphones to make that comment.
All right, well, I'm not familiar with technology, am I? My name is Kate Schmidt-Hopper. I've lived here in Lake County since 1995, and our home was affected by the Valley Fire. I keep my landline. I love my landline. It keeps costing me more and more, and I will not give up my landline, because in many situations, it has been the only communication that has worked. I don't live that far from Middletown, but out in the ranchos, cell phone service is very spotty. If you try and use your cell phone traveling over Highway 29 over the St. Helena's, you cannot use it on certain miles of it. People who live up there, there is no connectivity. Here in Middletown, our big southmost county location, smaller than Clear Lake to the north of us, there is cell phone service at the library sometimes. And when we have community meetings, sometimes we do not have connectivity and we can't provide any sort of internet, either PEG TV or Zoom attendance for people who cannot attend. They cannot drive in, they have no car, but they're still involved in the community. So I would urge the CPUC to be sure to support rural communities who have been in existence for a really long time and for whom landlines are an essential service, a basic service, and not allow AT&T profit margin to influence the political process of providing for Californians. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And with that, I will turn to Commissioner Hauk for closing remarks.
So thank you. I want to thank Commissioner Reynolds for his leadership in this important proceeding. I want to thank all of the presenters that came today and provided information to help inform us of the issues that we're grappling with in looking at this rulemaking. I want to thank all of the CPUC communication staff that worked really hard to come up with the excellent workshop that we had today. I want to thank Commissioner Reynolds' advisor, Carolyn Shen, my advisor as Carrie Ann Shepard and Caleb Jones. And I want to thank Chairman Simon and the Middletown Rancheria for hosting us today. And again, I want to say thank you to the panelists again for sharing their important perspectives with us. This is a critical rulemaking, and it's important to hear from all of you, especially those in rural tribal areas and also inner city areas where service is difficult to get. And again, we look forward to continuing the discussions both with the public and through workshops as we evaluate the rulemaking.
And I similarly would like to thank all of our panelists today for sharing their views with us. We really appreciate all of your input and your thoughts as the Commission continues evaluating what changes, if any, seem appropriate for our COLA rules. Last but not least, I want to give a huge thanks to everyone who's helped to put this event together, from the Executive Office and Broadband and Communications Division, Deputy Executive Director Anna Maria Johnson, Director Rob Osborne, Risa Hernandez, Doris Chow, Ben Menzies, Cole Brisbola, and David Bath, and many more for hatching the plan to hold this workshop, meeting with the panelists beforehand, and coordinating with IT staff and the commissioner offices and the administrative law judge to make this possible. Thanks to our dedicated CPUC IT staff for making sure all the technical and broadcasting details went smoothly today, and thank you for troubleshooting along the way. Thank you to the liaisons at Middletown Rancheria that coordinated with the CPUC on putting this workshop together, Karen Trejo, Tribal Administrator Leland McGee, and Tribal Chairman Simon. And I want to also thank my Bagley Keene partner, Commissioner Darcy Hauk, for her time today co-moderating this workshop and for bringing her perspective in the questions to this workshop. Lastly, I want to thank everyone who's attended this event today, whether in person or remotely. We tremendously value everyone's participation. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And with that, we can close today's workshop. Have a wonderful weekend.